But let's go ahead and get started. We appreciate you being here this morning, and we have a full agenda. We do not have any public comment to my knowledge, so let's go ahead and jump to item 3.2. This is R277-497, School Accountability Systems, and we're going to turn time over to Deputy Stallings to give us a brief overview.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. So R277-497, School Accountability System, is being amended due to the passage of HB 308, which eliminated the requirement for the State Board of Education to issue an overall rating or a single rating. As a result, this R277-497 is about our school accountability system, and you'll see that the majority of the rule is deleting the elements related to assigning a letter grade. And we've got Anne Michelle Neal here with us, who is the accountability specialist. She knows all things related to these calculations. And if you could come over here, Anne Michelle. Yes. First on the block, so you don't quite know where to go, but right here is where we'll ask people to come and sit.
Either one.
And as you can see, there's another thing besides the elimination of the single rating. This rule also eliminates the student growth target, and we will be, as a state, relying on the student growth percentile. And Anne Michelle can speak much more in depth and with more detail than I can about this, but the recommendations on the remaining parts of the rule are as a result of the board's Assessment and Accountability Advisory Committee and recommendations they have for changes to how SGP, how the weights are allocated to schools for purposes of accountability. So I don't know if you want to turn the time over to Anne Michelle to add anything, or we could just go right into questions.
Well, let me just add briefly, there were a couple emails sent with a 5-minute YouTube video that talks about the student growth percentile, and I don't know if the public is aware of that. I don't know what the video is called, but it's under USBE Media. I understand that we had some heavy agenda items yesterday, so I don't know what your time looked like, but questions on the student growth percentile is in a video that's within your email as well, because it is somewhat complicated to explain in a couple minutes. Is that right, Anne Michelle? Before I turn it over there, committee members, do you have any questions? Member Wood and then Member Lear.
I just had one, just the thing, it kind of paused me on 51. The superintendent shall assign point weights, is that the technical term? Because I went out and I'm looking it up and all I found was that that's a term they use in archery. And so it was like, it just seemed, and I'm like, okay, I just need someone to tell me, is that the way we always?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Legislative Code 53E-5-2, maybe somewhere around 205, requires that the state board assigned growth in terms of weights, and then this board rule R277-497 clarifies those parts of 53E-5-2 that are the obligation of the superintendent. So that is why the weighting of points for growth is described in this rule.
Member Lear, did you have a question or was?
I did. Do you want me to go ahead?
Please.
I had a couple questions. On line 71.
Can we throw a mic on you? Is that okay?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Line 71, and I appreciate the YouTube videos, I appreciate everything else, but this rule is the legal standard for this. So I'm fixated on the fact that it has to try to explain as much as, this reading stuff like that is really hard. I'm not a psychometrician. I don't pretend to be, so that stuff just feels Greek to me. But I still identified a few things that I think are like not sufficiently defined. Line 71, it says, add all the weights and divide by the total number of tests. And I think that tests, what, do we need to say standardized assessments? Do we need, because
That is a great point of clarification. We use the word tests instead of students because each student typically takes 3 state assessments annually for English, language arts, math, and science. So here we're being very clear that we are in the denominator, we're creating a growth score for all 3 subject areas. And so then it's the number of tests in the denominator, not the number of students.
so
But we could be more clear about
I'm feeling like there could be parents who read, and I know, I'm always told, parents don't read these rules, these are for the higher level administrators, but I think they could, and it should be clear enough. So, do you want to say student standardized assessments? It seems to me there's a phrase that,
Is there a amendment in there for clarity? Is that what we're seeking here?
I'm seeking that, yes, but I don't know what it is, because I
And
don't.
Michelle, is there something that would offer more clarity to LEAs and parents and whoever opened this up?
Yeah, I do like the language of statewide standardized assessment or
And to
something-
replace tests.
something to that extent. Yeah.
Statewide standardized assessments. So that's an amendment I would propose for that. I've got one more question.
Statewide standardized assessments?
Yeah, the reason for that level of specificity is I think we try to avoid, the tests being referenced here are RISE or Utah Aspire Plus, but the need to potentially make future amendments if those assessment names change.
So let me first ask, Member Lear, is your question related to this? Or I think Member Hart has a question on the proposed amendment?
No, I don't, it's a different issue.
Well, let me put an amendment out there then. The amendment that is proposed, or the amendment that's on the floor, is that on line 71, we are removing the word tests and replacing it with statewide standardized assessments. Is that correct?
That would be my amendment, yes,
Okay.
proposed amendment.
Member Hart and then Member Wood.
I support that motion, but I do have, I have a question, just to be, I guess, difficult. What do? You don't include the writing, though, or do you include the writing in the grades that they do a 4th test? But my concern is those aren't reported out on the same metric. So really, maybe it's just a curiosity question. Do you norm those in some way and then include them, or do you exclude them? Or, because in, a couple of grades, they take 4 tests, not 3.
Right. For the purposes of accountability, when writing was removed from all grades and only administered in grade 4 and 8, we no longer use writing in accountability, so it's excluded entirely.
Thank you. That simplifies it.
Member Wood.
And is this the number of tests administered?
The number of tests with scores.
So
So is that important to add?
is there a way to clarify that?
A lot of that is described in a lot of detail in the accountability technical manual, which is referenced in this rule, if that's helpful. Really, thinking about it a little bit more, the denominator for the growth calculation is the number of students with growth scores within that subject.
Follow-up question?
Yeah.
So if you had a student who was coming in for the first year, they would not have a growth score yet.
That's correct.
So their score would not be used in the denominator.
Yes, students need at least one prior year assessment to calculate growth. So that maybe is an important clarification.
So help me with the language. I don't, like I said, I want to be clear, but I don't want to skew what you're trying to do.
Okay, so,
Yeah, let's look at the rule. And admittedly, I don't know if statewide standardized tests or assessments offers clarity to me. Because maybe I'm not understanding, Member Lear, what
I just want it to be, I mean, somebody could read it and say, it could read line 71, add all the weights and divide by the total number of tests. Is that math tests? Is that spelling tests? Is that standardized tests? Is that?
Is it subject-specific test?
Right.
Okay,
And
so,
so somebody could read it who's not really familiar with statewide assessments and read it very broadly and say, this is a false metric for our school or this student or whatever.
let me ask, Anne Michelle, do you have a good, I hear what you're saying. Do you have a good grasp on what Member Lear is hoping to gain, or the committee, for that matter, is gain clarity here?
Yes, I'm
reason-
grappling myself with what is a better replacement.
Well, the reason I ask is I'm wondering if we can circle table, not to another meeting, but to another, like, bring this back on an agenda item. Because I don't think the five of us are necessarily, I don't have any ideas, and I don't know if you guys have any ideas. So we could spend time, or I could let you go sit somewhere where you can think, where you're not in the public eye on the spot, and maybe come up. Tell me, committee, what do you think of that?
I agreed. I was going to propose the same thing. If you need to think about it. And let me also kind of add to that. If you think about it and you say, I can't come up with anything that is adequately inclusive, but not, but then I will defer to you and say that the people who are dealing with these issues would understand what is meant, and really this is the best we can do.
Okay.
So I would,
I can offer, right now, the most clear and accurate replacement for tests would be growth scores. That all the point weights for growth are summed and then divided by the total number or the n size for the number of growth scores
Member
in the
Lear.
denominator. But I don't know if that is more clear to the public or any more transparent.
I actually am a little worried that
Maybe
makes it a little bit worse. My concern is a little mitigated by being reminded that there's a technical manual that someone could refer to for more information. So
but would you
I hadn't-
should you reference then the technical tests as explained in the technical manner, technical manner,
Manual. We hear you.
incorporated by reference?
I'm just saying that there are those answers available in another resource, and that may suffice if there's not a better way to describe it that doesn't create more questions than answers.
Committee and Michelle, Darren has he's online, and he might have a response for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm wondering if, to this discussion on line 71, if where we say divide by the total number of tests, if we just inserted eligible or qualifying test, if that resolves Board Member Lear's questions about trying to add clarity to that. There is in the technical manual a lengthy description about what qualifies for an eligible test. You know, how many questions does the student have to respond to? Is the student enrolled in the school for at least 160 days? There's a series of if-then statements in the technical manual, but they all center around a qualifying test or an eligible test.
Member Lear? Yeah, go ahead.
I like the idea of just, you think about it and come back in half an hour or whenever, and talk with Darren, and I'll agree with whatever you propose.
And I am open to adding after tests as described in the technical manual, blah, 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 blah.
So there is a motion on the floor. I don't know if it can be pulled off, or if we can just vote it
I think you
somewhere.
could make a motion to postpone till later in the meeting, because is that what you want, is to give Anne Michelle maybe an opportunity to speak with Darren, and I might even be able to step out for a minute, and we could talk about it and get the amendment ready, and then bring it back later in the meeting? Would that work for you, Michelle? So then, Anne Michelle, the motion would just be to postpone this item till the later meeting and move to the next
So
item.
moved.
Okay.
That would be my motion.
Thank you, and we'll probably bring it back at the end. I don't know if we'll slide it in between two agenda items. Is that okay? Okay, thank you.
I had one other thought that is not as big a deal, but on line 118, to appropriately assess the educational impact of a school, that felt like sort of odd language to me. It's not new language, it's been in there. Does that feel okay to everybody else, or am I just,
Can you state it again? Sorry.
on line 118, the phrase, the educational impact is what seems a little, do we really mean the effectiveness? Do we mean the success? Do we mean, I just, that, it feels like a very vague phrase. And if you could say, no, I think it's okay, then I will, okay.
Will
then I
you,
will
and Michelle, will you
not
just
obsess.
take a minute, look at that line as well? And then when you come back, maybe we can address that and give us your
Yes.
thoughts on that.
My first reaction is that that is probably the language used in 53E-2-205 and 206, and that's why we have pulled it into here, but I can check that.
Okay, that's great. That was a lesser concern. So thanks. Those were the two issues I had.
Okay? Member Carey?
Question, why were the weight parameters associated with some moved up, some went down? What was the reasoning for that?
That's a great question.
And thank you, did you send the video?
Yes,
It was-
or I sent it to Matt and to
Somebody-
Andy, and
I understand the weighting much better, I just don't know why we changed the weighting, so thank you.
yes, the reason why we changed the weighting is because this was a recommendation brought to the board from our Assessment and Accountability Policy Advisory Committee. We used an SGP-only growth model during the years where we needed a waiver, an accountability waiver due to COVID-19. And this change makes that growth calculation shift permanent, which it's also included in the Utah Consolidated Application, which came to you for approval in November and went through public comment and received wide support for this change to growth. So the ranges have changed to be only reliant on SGP and not SGP and student growth targets. And the ranges are defined as quantiles, which essentially means we took the distribution of all students and made 5 equal groups with it from those scores. And that defined the ranges for the point index.
So the waiver that was requested during COVID, what we're really doing.
Correct. We'd like to make that change permanently in the
And would it be fair
accountability
to say
system.
that we requested the waiver because COVID, we weren't able to hit the target?
No, a waiver one year it was called a waiver, another year it was called an addendum, were required by all states during 2020 and 2021 due to COVID because there were no assessments in the spring of 2020. And so every state had to clarify in those waivers how they would operate their accountability system in the absence of test scores from 2020. So it was several years to arrive at this point, but you look very confused.
I am, because I just don't
Member
understand
Carey,
why
will you
we're
put-
making something permanent that.
Will you get a mic on your?
We like it, but I think it's more fair. The field likes it. The APAC prefers it over the more convoluted, complex model.
Or Member Carey,
I just have one follow-up question. You said the word fair. How does this make it more fair? To whom?
Maybe fair is not the right word for, I think it's more clear, I think is what I said.
You think,
Or what I meant, what I intended to say, that this is more clear. more
Yes,
transparent.
I was just going to add, and I'm not sure, and unfortunately, I should have pulled up the board policy, but just to give you a sense of who's on the Assessment and Accountability Advisory Committee, and Michelle, you may want to give a little bit more of a rundown of that group, but it's quite a large group, isn't it, like 20 to 30 people? Is that right? And it includes assessment directors. I know at least one board member sits on there. Of course, our assessment accountability staff serve as non-voting members. But we also have a technical advisor. It's an outside consultant who, the Center for
Assessment?
thank you, who help attend those meetings and support. So I just wanted to share, there is a group that studies these concepts and makes recommendations to the board. So that's the group who's been studying this and working on it and provided that recommendation.
I appreciate that. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
When this
let's,
group made its recommendation, was that a vote?
Yes,
And was that vote unanimous?
yes,
Okay, thank you.
believe so.
Well, it was, or,
Yes.
Darren Nielsen is
Superintendent-
the staff person who staffs that meeting, so I don't know if
He would have the notes.
Darren, do you
that
have
he
an answer
prepares
to
for
that
you
on
If it was a
this
unanimous vote.
recommendation, whether it was unanimous or not?
Yeah, I also believe it was, but let me verify it, going back into the meeting minutes, and then I will provide that information to this committee if you'll give me just a few minutes.
And also, just as an FYI, Darren also sends the meeting minutes and agenda each month. I believe that they have a meeting next week, because I was looking at the agenda just recently, because I noticed that the group is going to be looking at making a recommendation related to the kindergarten assessments. So you should have received an agenda or minutes.
from that?
May 11th at 1 PM, there is a Zoom link.
Yes, those meetings are held 3 times a year with the Center for Assessment, Dr. Scott Marion, and he's new, I don't remember his last name, I apologize, from the Center for Assessment come in and lead a group of stakeholders. Those stakeholders apply for their positions on the APAC. Board Member Wood is a former member of the APAC. But there are certain roles, this many principals, this many superintendents, this many assessment directors for representation, and they serve terms. There are term limits to that committee.
I have no further questions.
Thank you. Darren, you have a answer for us?
Yeah, it was a January 27th, 2022 APAC meeting, and the vote was 7 in favor, 0 opposed.
Thank you. Yeah, just a reminder, there is a motion on the floor to table this, so we will have this discussion again, but Member Hart, go ahead.
I hesitate I try not to use too many personal examples, but to answer your question, Member Carey, I never understood why I got the score I did as a school. The calculations they just appeared, and I couldn't make rhyme or reason. I couldn't explain it to my stakeholders, parents, teachers, and so, it was hard, and it seemed like it was needlessly hard for what the category was that they were trying to describe. So that's just one perspective of
You don't mean your school grade, you mean?
this
The growth indicator.
the growth indicator.
Yeah.
Because it shows up on the dashboard, and then people say, well, what does that mean? Like, what does that do? And then I didn't know I knew how to improve it, but I really just didn't sound intelligent.
Yeah, the growth index makes it really hard to interpret, and this change simplifies it somewhat, but we still have to index the points because it's required in legislative code. But this does simplify that growth score, and like I mentioned, to me, it's more clear and easy to interpret.
Okay, the The motion on the floor is that the agenda item 3.2 R277-497 be tabled and come back later in this meeting. I'm going to ask committee members, are there any other questions on this? Otherwise, I'd like to just focus on lines 71 and 72 where the amendment is when it comes back, and perhaps a brief explanation on 118 or 181. I can't.
And I don't know.
Oh, okay,
I'm okay. If they don't, if nobody else is bothered by that.
okay.
That's no big deal.
So we'll focus on those lines 71 and 72. So all in favor of tabling, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Thank you, Anne Michelle. Thank you, Superintendent Nelson.
Do you want me to stay for 9:20?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'm gonna grab my water bottle.
Our next agenda item is item 3.3, sections R277-920, 5 and 12. So committee members recognize that this is just sections within the rule that will be discussed here today. This is school improvement and leadership development. We're looking at an amendment, and we'll turn time over to Deputy Stallings.
Yes, so this rule is also impacted by HB 308 that eliminated the board's requirement to issue a single rating. And so in two places throughout the rule, I guess maybe three, there was a metric that was related to the letter grade or the lowest rating, single rating in the state's accountability system. So you'll see in those places where the letter grade or single rating were previously or are currently stated, that we've replaced that with their equivalent points possible, or the percentage of points. So the standard is the same, it's just instead of using the single rating or the letter grade, we're converting that into the calculation of the points. So you can see that here, and this is related to how staff identify schools for targeted need status. And then later on, again, the points were needed to replace the letter grade to help determine how a school either exits the Springboard program or can qualify for an extension. Because anyway, under the law, if a Springboard school doesn't exit after a certain time, there's certain consequences that can apply, but a school can apply for an extension. So I don't know if Anne Michelle would like to add anything, but essentially this is just a replacement with the same standard, but instead of referring to a single rating or the letter grade, we've now included the calculation or what that would mean.
Committee members, any questions? Sure. We'll turn time over to Anne Michelle to offer any additional thoughts while committee members look through. Please, Anne Michelle, any?
I wouldn't add anything to Deputy Superintendent Stallings' comments.
Okay, hopefully that was enough time, committee members. I know when I asked, I know Deputy Stallings just covered it. I said, are we changing anything? The percentages, the weights, they haven't changed as far as I understand. It's just that for this rule's sake, that letter grade will not be attached to it. So it might be more simple than maybe we're overthinking it. I don't know. But I'll wait a few minutes or let's say seconds for.
I do have one.
Okay.
And again, it's in this section, but not.
Sure. Remember there, will you hit a mic? There you go.
And it came up a few months ago regarding a charter school. So I think it is an important thing to add to make it consistent for district schools compared to charter schools. So it would be on line 99. And it was listing the things that could happen if there's not progress or whatever.
Yeah, the more rigorous intervention.
Right. And if you notice on line 109, because there's a section for district schools, section for charter schools. If you notice on line 109, it says that this committee, or I forget who it is, the committee can take other action, but it doesn't say that for district schools. And yet, I think that option should be available for this committee. So I just wanted to add, following line 99, and that would be a small Roman numeral 5, take other appropriate action.
Thank you, Member Lear. I'm not as familiar with that. I'm going to ask staff to speak to that.
Well, I remember now, Board Member Lear, I apologize that you sent me some feedback and then I lost it and
Fine.
didn't address it, so I
A million
apologize.
rules, million pages.
So, in general, the state board has the authority to take other action. And so in this case, I think that what Board Member Lear is stating is that the group that's representing or reviewing and making a recommendation to the board also have that possibility. So I don't personally see any problem with adding that.
I just thought they should be parallel.
Would that just be a 5
Yeah,
before C?
Uh-huh, that's what I was thinking.
yeah, I can do
So
that. You put it in there, great.
let's throw that up there. And Member Lear, will you just check and make sure that's a motion you want to make?
I had take other appropriate action, but I am totally fine with take other action
You can do
too,
it appropriate.
after line 99, that's fine.
Well, are you trying to match
I was
E
trying
on
to, I
109, or are you
was trying to be at least
The other one
consistent.
says take other action.
Right, which is fine, I'm fine, I don't want to nitpick. I just,
I'd rather just match up
that's
if
fine,
that's the
that's fine,
purpose, but,
that's my motion.
okay. So the motion on the floor is that in section 5, section 12, my apologies, after, let's see, subsection 5,
Or you could just say that the
B5.
committee add on after line
okay,
99.
yep. So the motion is that the committee add B, take other action, 5, take other action after line 99. Any discussion to that motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
That's
Any
the only
other-
thing I had.
Okay, I'd entertain another motion then.
Go ahead, I'll make it if you want me to.
Please.
I move that the committee approves sections R277-920-5 and 12 on first reading, as amended, on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves sections R277-9205 and 12, draft 1 as amended, on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes. Thank you.
Board Member Hymas, I think I may have a solution for 497 if you.
We back
we wanna-
already?
If we want to take care of that and get it off the agenda.
I'm willing to do that.
Okay.
Committee members, we okay?
So I do like Superintendent Nielsen's recommendation of qualifying tests as described in the Utah Accountability Technical Manual
Okay.
to replace tests.
Member Lear, I'm going to turn this over to you since this was your original inquiry.
And can I just ask, is that, without going back and rereading the rule, is that incorporated by reference already, Angie?
It is in not the normal way, and we actually discussed, let me get to the right rule, sorry. I need to look at it again. It is incorporated by reference on lines 106 through, well, actually 98 through 108. I can get to the rule and show you.
Do we need to say in that amendment as incorporated by reference, or is that unnecessary?
Yeah, or as described in subsection 6, so I can do that right here. Do you want me to write the motion really quickly?
Okay.
And that's common, right? As described in subsection. We've seen that a lot, so.
Utah Accountability Technical Manual?
So my motion would be that the committee approves R277 my motion would be that to amend by saying that the committee, line 71, 72, now I can't
Sorry,
read it.
just one moment. I just got to get the
This is
right
an eye test, I
section.
know it is.
336, section.
Costco for my eye test. Okay, so my motion is the committee amend line 71, 72 to say that the committee qualifying tests as, that the committee qualify
No, add,
Qualifying
sorry,
tests.
Add,
We're gonna add qualifying, so it'll say the total number of qualifying
That the
tests.
committee add the total number of qualifying tests as described in the Utah Accountability Technical Manual, described in R 277-497, 3 (6).
6, sorry,
I do I need to
And
say
then-
the lines?
before
Total number of is already in there, so we're just gonna put qualifying is where the.
to establish. How's that on, so it's right, let me show you the,
Start with qualifying.
so right here where it says number of tests, the new language, and I guess we could say number of tests. We could just rewrite the whole thing, and so that we're stating what 71 and 72 is.
I'll let you make that technical correction, and that's the gist of the
I
amendment.
think Ben has it.
Does he have it? Okay.
Yeah, because we're adding, we're simply, if I'm understanding the motion correctly, we are adding qualifying tests as described in Utah Accountability Technical Manual, described in section that.
Huh.
Then, I don't know, before to establish. I don't know where
It just
that,
goes before to establish, that's where the amendment would go. I think, is that what you're
no,
intending,
well,
Ben?
to establish is not on the
On line
original
71,
rule.
72. And I
No.
just put away that, oh, here it is. No, I didn't, I don't know what I did with my paper that had that.
So it'd be before the total number of.
I'm just gonna do it this way
Online.
and just rewrite it, if
Just
that's
rewrite the line?
okay.
Okay.
So that it just was clear what those two lines will state.
Okay.
To establish a percentage.
Chair Hymas, could I make
before.
a friendly amendment to use the first as defined in the Utah Accountability Technical Manual, described in section,
So we don't have described.
so we don't have described twice?
Yes.
And,
Is that all right?
so this is the motion on the floor, is that correct, Member Lear? Are we,
Yes,
Oh, I actually
Um,
typed it the way it was. Sorry.
it's all right, no.
Trying to
She-
make
she's
it
doing it on
readable.
purpose.
It's
Yeah.
not a test, I
It's not
promise.
easy, it's not hard to confuse me.
There we go. How's that? You could just say for the motion to read as indicated.
Yes,
or, you
as
know, in-
indicated on the screen.
That way, you don't have to read the whole subsection A.
can I, so this is the motion on the floor is that the committee amends line 71, 72 to read as indicated, or as follows. I'll read it for the record here.
Okay.
Add all the weights, doesn't read well. Maybe it does. Add all the weights and divide by the total number of qualifying tests as defined in the Utah Accountability Technical Manual described in section R277-5497, section 3, subsection 6, to establish a percentage and. That's lines, proposed new lines for 71, 72. I'm going to ask, do we need as defined in Utah, or can we just say as described in section R277?
Do
Or
that
is it
way.
not described in there? Are we
No.
doubling up here? That's what I'm asking.
It just, well, actually, let's do 6, if we're gonna do that.
Because 6,
Sorry, because if you look at, let me show you, and then you can make the decision.
well, because 6 is just says a copy of the Utah Accountability Technical
Yeah.
Manual is located at, then it
So-
gives a link, and then it says that it's located here.
As
So 5
linked
would
at-
actually be better, because 5 requires the staff to create the Utah Accountability Technical Manual. So after looking at it, I think that would be better. So would you, so change this to as described in?
This is Member Lear's motion, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, because it just gets, we're just adding things and.
I'll let you figure out the technical
I know it's
positions.
wordy, but I actually like the
Okay.
detail because then some people might just see Utah Accountability Technical Manual and they're gonna be like, oh yeah, I know what that is. And others will really want to be able to see the language in code or in the rule. So I would leave it as is. That would be my recommendation, although it's a little wordy. It's
I'm
accurate.
fine with that. I would move the amendment as it's written on the screen.
Okay, any other discussion to that motion? Okay. So the member before the committee is that the committee amends line 71 and 72 to read, add all the weights and divide by the total number of qualifying tests as defined in the Utah Accountability Technical Manual described in subsection R277-49735 to establish a percentage and. Committee members, all in favor say aye.
I,
Aye. Thank you. It passes unanimously.
Can I point something? Staff just brought something to my attention on that previous motion we had on 920.
Okay.
The language we added there is actually, I don't think we noticed it. Or the E that's already in that rule applies to all types of schools and not just charter schools. So I think the language we added actually may be duplicitous there. Staff just pointed that out, and I think
and if the school is a district school, on line 93,
E applies to district schools, charter schools, and everything, so you can take.
Right.
but I
So-
don't know.
Yeah,
It's
'cause E
five. The
is
dis-
just
dis-
under 5.
Yeah, so 5, the groups shall, and then it gives, they could require personnel changes. If it's a district school, B applies. If it's a charter school, C applies. If it's a charter school, D applies. But then E also applies to all.
I see. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Yes, I see. The E,
I don't know how to undo that.
the E goes to
Maybe
both.
without objection, we can retract that.
Or you
Sure,
could vote.
thank you. Yeah,
can
I just,
vote.
I just didn't kind of follow the numbers and letters
That's-
correctly.
Yes, so
Yeah,
we're
so,
prevailing side, we can.
Well, did we already, so we've already passed the motion on 497, okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't look at that
So
more carefully.
what you could do is just redo the motion and just take out as amended and do the original motion if you wanted, if that makes sense. Just revote.
on 920 section, okay, so do we need to vote to bring this back? I don't know how, it's committee.
I don't
It's-
think we
It's
did.
less
Okay,
formal,
okay,
yeah.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
like, it's committee.
I've
It's-
had enough.
And I'll just put maybe withdrawn under
Sure.
for the record on that motion.
And
We
thanks for calling it to our attention, Tracy, and I just didn't read numbers, letters correctly.
So, for the record,
So I was a little hyped.
as been discussed, there was a misunderstanding
Do
on
what they needed to do.
R277-920, sections 5 and 12. On line 99, there was an amendment, and we are going to take a second, and I guess I'm going to move that we
That lady wanted to do something.
Withdraw
that
the amendment. and
motion.
then- And then I guess the motion would be to vote on the underlying motion related to the rule.
So we are going to revote, so we're bringing this back from agenda item 3.3. We're going to revote on this motion. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves section R277, just not as amended. Okay.
Yeah, just not as
The
amended.
committee approves sections R277-925 and 12, draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you. Thank you, staff. Perfect.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Agenda item 3.4 is R277-618, Homeless Teen Center Grant Program. We're actually going to hear from Elise Newey. She is our newly appointed policy advisor, appointed, I don't know if she hired. Welcome, Elise. If you want to take this and give us some background, that'd be very helpful.
Say the rule number again, Matt, I'm sorry.
This is R277-618.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So this rule these rule changes pertain to an existing program that received additional funding that was appropriated during the most recent legislative session. So we just made some minor changes in the language to provide some greater flexibility for LEAs and for schools in applying and to reduce some of the burden for schools in applying for this program, so.
Staff, Todd call
Yes.
Sarah Young to answer questions you have on the rule.
I may have, just give me a sec.
I have some questions, Chair.
Yes, Member Carey, Vice Chair Carey.
So you indicated we're reducing the burden of LEAs to apply. Which provisions have been changed to make it easier for LEAs to apply for this program?
I will defer to any staff. How's that?
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Hymas. So Chief of Staff Sarah Young, in terms of the application component, we've clarified in terms of reducing those elements that are listed under may to be able to be more concise with the intent of moving those examples into the application. In addition to that, in the reporting section, we have removed data elements that we at USBE already have access to. And so asking them for the number of students they serve that are experiencing homelessness, we have that data available at USBE. It wouldn't be a regular reporting requirement. We would only be asking them to reflect back on the number of students their teen center was serving as the primary reporting component.
If I may, I have quite a few questions.
And just for your awareness, Member Carey, Member Lear has a light on as well, so I don't know if you want to get them all out or,
I just have one very small one, so
Okay.
I'll wait or do it whenever.
go
you
ahead,
want.
Vice Chair Carey.
So on line 37, and I think we've had this discussion before, Chief of Staff Young, we're changing the provision to say from homeless students to including students experiencing homelessness. Is there any distinction between those students who are voluntarily or involuntarily experiencing homelessness?
There is not.
And so a student who makes the decision that they don't want to go home, would they be considered under this provision homeless?
So it's a good question, and I'm pausing in terms of my response because when we look at the services for the teen centers, we are looking at them also through the lens of serving students who are vulnerable and at risk. So in terms of an individual student, they may have additional factors beyond their experience with homelessness.
Is the law that we're trying to comply with, does it say that our teen centers should service the homeless student population or the vulnerable or at-risk student population?
So it's actually not a law. It is a part of the information that's communicated to this agency from the original sponsor who requested this appropriation. The title of the funding was Homeless Teen Center, and in the description, it described for students that are vulnerable and at risk. So in this proposed rule that is before you today, we're trying to incorporate both of those aspects to be reflective of the information we have from the legislature.
From the legislature or the legislator? You said sponsor, singular, and now it seems like you're moving to the plural.
So it was passed by the legislature. The legislator provides information that then goes into the public COBE, which is where we reference the language specific to what was the intent for the line item funding.
Do you see this change as an expansion of the program when we change it from homeless students to including students experiencing homelessness?
I don't see it as an expansion necessarily through that terminology change. I would see it as an expansion in terms of the inclusion of vulnerable and at risk.
And again, no distinction between that student whose parents say, hey, we want you to go to church on Sunday. Student, parent gets in a fight. Student says, I'm not coming home tonight. that, in your opinion, even though it's voluntary on behalf of the student, under the terminology we have here, that student would qualify for these services?
So it's a good question. We would defer to the LEA in terms of identifying which students need the services at the local level. I will say in terms of the creation of this rule, we're trying to provide the guardrails. And so if there's additional clarification that we can provide to be clear, like, we're certainly open to that.
Do you have any information regarding how many of the current students being served by these centers are involuntary versus voluntary?
I do not.
Are you collecting that data?
We are not.
Do you think that's important data to have?
So I won't speak to the importance. It's really a question of if the board feels that is valuable to include it in the rule. I don't have a personal opinion on that.
Board Chair, may I? Sorry. Every 10 questions I ask you if I have.
Yeah, I'm nervous.
So,
Well, at least he's not putting you under oath.
yeah, that's true.
I have a question related to that when you get,
Well,
Is
a
that
break.
okay, Vice Chair? She has a related question to
or a
that.
comment.
sure. Well, if it's a comment, no, but if it's a question, yes.
Well, now I don't know.
It's a comment.
Well, then I think it can hold. So I really wasn't looking for your personal opinion. I was asking, and maybe there's an expert on staff that can address this, would it be important to track, we're looking at chronic absenteeism and we're looking to lump in excused absences and unexcused absences. And the reason we're looking for separate data sets and the reason USBE is now collecting data on those differences is because it matters. Is there an expert on this team working on this issue that could address, would it be significant to track these centers in terms of what percentage are voluntarily homeless versus which percentage are involuntarily homeless?
Do you know just, I don't even know where to start. I'm wondering if you have, as this is obviously on your mind, how would you start that just with questioning the student and then from an interview? Is that what you're wondering?
I think that's why I want to talk to an expert on staff, because I do see the challenges with that. The same thing with chronic absenteeism, right? Like, why are they being excused versus
Right.
non-excused?
I don't know if we have staff who will, oh, Katie, look at that, brave.
Hello, Board Member
here
Carey,
in the
I'm
mic.
right behind you.
Please, yeah, come up here. And Katie, will you introduce yourself? Thank you.
Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. This doesn't directly answer your question, Board Member Carey, but I will say that I'm proud of USBE in the sense that we try to adhere to the principle of data minimization, which means that we only collect the data that we need to typically for reporting purposes. So I think if the board felt that that was a worthy cause, obviously we could explore that. But the general practice is to not collect information from LEAs unless we absolutely need to. In the event that there was some kind of breach on our end, it would help prevent data loss.
Okay, thank you. So can I move on to my next?
If we're still there, can I
Sure.
now make my
Let's
comment?
hear from Member Lear, then we'll go back to Vice Chair Carey.
I want to make sure I'm understanding Teen Center, Sarah, and because you sort of live in my community, this is what, the same kind of thing that East High has, for instance, is that right?
That is
Where I
correct.
volunteered for years. And to the point of homeless, what students use that, and how they're defined. My experience, and again, I think Molly made a good point about not using too many anecdotal or personal experiences, but my experience in working with those students was that they came in and out and in and out and in and out, and there was no categorization of those students. They sometimes came in and used the shower. They sometimes came into the boutique and got clothes or got food. So that there wasn't like a bright line test between homeless by choice and homeless by not wanting to go home. And the school was very good in serving all students who came regardless of their designation. So I'm not sure it would be easy to to differentiate between those who are homeless for a day or wanting to stay away versus those who were technically labeled homeless. So
This East, is that what you said?
it was East High School, yes, and
They-
now most of I think all the high schools in Salt Lake have those.
But it's just open, it wasn't, they had to ask questions or
It
go
was-
through a,
They went through, there's a supervisor there,
Okay.
and somebody, they don't just get to come and go, but somebody escorts them down there, lets them use the facilities, get clothes, get food if they need it. There was a place for them to take a nap during the day if they wanted to.
Okay,
But
so
nobody
it's-
quizzed them about why
Okay.
are you here, what's your status?
so they could have, I mean, anybody can take advantage, but we're saying, if you feel like you need to be there, then
That's-
come to us.
That was the mindset
Okay.
of this teen center.
So it wasn't necessarily, we didn't even, according to your
That my
experience, you didn't even
experience.
ask, like, did you get in a fight with your parents? Are you here because you need, or are you just here because of location and?
Right.
Okay, interesting. We have a light from Member Wood, and then let's go to Member Hart, and then back to Vice Chair Carey.
I'd like to make a motion to delete primarily on line 11.
I'm sorry, did you say you're making a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to delete primarily on line 11.
Okay, delete primarily. We have, can I just bring up, we have Superintendent Dixon and, okay, can we hear, do you mind if we hear from Superintendent Dixon?
That's fine.
Superintendent?
Thank you. I'm on the road, so I apologize for not being there and not being on camera. A couple of things I wanted to point out, and this goes back to Board Member Carey's language about homeless students versus students experiencing homelessness. We have tried very hard not to stigmatize or label students. So you'll hear us be very intentional about student first language. So we're not talking about two different kinds of categories. It's like saying students living in conditions of poverty versus poor students. When I hear those labels, I just personalizing this, it really gives me hackles because we should always be student first. So I want to just be clear that you might see staff and hear staff be very intentional about not using labels. So we're not really talking about two different categories. And then these centers, these teen centers are new, and we don't want to stigmatize students for using the center. So asking them why they're there puts a stigma on them. And some of the success, East High is a really good example of students coming into the food pantry, for example, and the allowance of just bringing buddies. So you would see kids from all economic backgrounds coming in and getting a chocolate milk and cheese sticks, for example, together. So really trying to destigmatize. And the policy center, who I think we have representatives there in the room. One of the things I so appreciate are the teen ambassadors that they've gotten involved. So teens are really trying to help lead these efforts to make sure that their peers have the resources they need. So Board Member Carey, to your question, I hear your concern about, can kids just get mad at their parents and come use the teen center? These are not overnight shelters. So they're pop in during the day. So it wouldn't really impact those relationships of whatever's going on at home. It's just to provide students the basic resources that they need and, a place to get those. So I hope that helps with that distinction. Thank
Chair,
you.
may I? Oh, wait, there's a motion on the floor.
Well, there's a proposed motion on the floor yet. It hasn't been accepted yet, but we do have Deputy Norman who has her hand up as well.
I just wanted to respond. I had a question for the superintendent.
Oh, yeah, please, Vice Chair Carey. Deputy Norman, will you hang on just 1 minute?
So Superintendent, if everyone can use this facility, why even have the limiting language, including students experiencing homelessness? Why don't we just say what it appears to be, which is if you are a vulnerable or at-risk student, if I can understand the wisdom of Board Member Wood's motion to strike primarily, but I think we go all in and say, if any student can already use these facilities, why don't we say any vulnerable or at-risk student or their parents can use these facilities?
Superintendent?
That was a question.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would defer to the policy center in the room, but our experience is that the intended legislation, and you also have private donors who have partnered with this legislation. So the private-public partnership is a really important part of it. And the intention is to focus on students who are experiencing homelessness. It would not prevent peers who need support from coming into the center as well. But that is the primary target of the funding and the resources. So I think straying too far from that might not be in keeping with the public-private partnership. But again, I would defer to those in the room who have been working on this.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Superintendent.
Deputy Norman, do you have a comment?
Mine was in regards to the data collection, and so I think that maybe we're past that point and can go to those that are in the room. Unless there's more clarification on the data piece. Would you like me just to say my comment? So previously, when there was the homeless centers, it really talked about the fact that it had to be a federal designation. So when students came in, they had to say whether or not they were eligible for free and reduced lunch. And then they were able to get those services. Students who were not eligible for free and reduced lunch were not eligible for services. And so we had a lot of students who felt that by even entering the doorway or accessing, we have a giant label on their head and refused to access it. And they were some of our most vulnerable population. So they chose not to participate. And then we showed that increase and following them and what that looked like when it was opened greater, to be able to say exactly to your point, those students who are most vulnerable or at greatest risk, they found that the students that were coming in, some of the schools that I visited that have the teen centers, they were providing the services for the students who did need them the very most, but the stigma was no longer attached.
Thank you.
That concludes what I was going to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Norman. Okay, Member Wood, you have a proposed motion. And
Would need a second.
no, not in committee.
Oh, okay, thanks.
So your motion is to delete primarily on line 11.
May I
Is it-
speak to it?
Yes, please.
Okay, I just see this, so having toured the Northridge one, having been involved in the opening of the Clearfield one, I've seen where it's not, we're not differentiating the students that need, it's not, well, are you homeless? Like, okay, we want you to come in here. No, we're speaking to, we're serving students first, and all these populations. And so I just want to clarify that. And I love that there is a social worker there on site. There's an intake person who's there to share with them and give them the needs that they have, whether it's snacks, whether it's laundry, whether it's hygiene. It's an amazing thing that we're doing for these kids.
If, and I'm not a big if fan, right? But if a center is full or running low on resources, then do we say, well, we need to focus and primarily serve those that are vulnerable and at risk? Do we need to start prioritizing?
Well, being in these locations, they are serviced by community member donations. And there's no limit. I mean, you walk in there, there's a fridge full of snacks for the day. You walk into the bathrooms, there's hygiene products that are, and it's really teaching them a level of, some of these children, I believe, these students live in a scarcity mindset where what's here today might be gone tomorrow because of what they've lived with. And this is showing them that there's still hope. And so they're going to be in the community, the students that I've watched come in and
Right.
match funds and do fundraising. These
But those would be.
So I don't feel that there's a need to start to say, well, we're gonna take you over you. No, we're gonna take and
Well,
support
but that's, I
students.
guess to my point is, they are run well, and things are going well, from what I understand. We're wanting to, not open the floodgates, because they've already been open, but we're saying it's open to all. Now, this says in line 11, 10 and 11, teen center grant to primarily serve vulnerable and at-risk students. So again, currently it's, those kids are the ones who need it, they're learning good skills. I would say that those are probably the vulnerable and at-risk who are using it. But what happens when those that are not vulnerable and at-risk start taking advantage, and the vulnerable and at-risk, that's the thing I'm posing here. Does that happen in your experience? I've never volunteered at one of these.
Well,
So-
I think the wording is that they are there, the teen center grant to serve students experiencing homelessness as well as other vulnerable and at-risk students. So taking the primarily out,
Wouldn't make a difference at all? That's what I'm wondering,
Yeah.
if it would, why take it out if it's not, if it doesn't matter?
And Matt, in my experience of working in and out of that center at East High School for 6 years plus, there's never been not enough. So that's, anecdotal again and personal, but it's never been something where we said, oh my gosh, we've got to limit this. And we had lots and lots of students taking food from there. Some probably needed it more than others.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. This is the experience that I don't have, so I appreciate personally appreciate the anecdotal feedback.
It's
so.
an absolutely beautiful thing to see that community come together and serve those students. It
Yeah.
makes me a little,
Well, let's,
yeah.
if
I
there's.
think it read better, but if it's a no vote, we move
Well,
forward,
yeah,
so.
and I think that's where, I don't think we have any more discussion on this motion, so let's go ahead and put that before the committee. The motion on the floor is that the committee delete primarily on line 11. All in favor say aye.
I,
Those opposed, no? No? Okay, so that passes 3-2. Are there other questions? I think Vice Chair Carey, you had additional questions. If not, a motion?
Yeah, I have a motion, but I also have several more questions. The motion I would like to make is lines 37 through 38. I would like that to read, ability to provide students vulnerable and at-risk students with assistance, guidance, and connection to necessary resources. Whoever drafted the original edits in this motion, they have deleted the word homeless and homelessness from every portion of the original rule except for this line. And if the decision has been made that this is no longer to focus on homeless, and the superintendent is concerned about stigma, let's eradicate it in its entirety. It doesn't make any sense to delete homeless and homelessness, as far as I can tell, at every other place besides this one. And even with the approval of Board Member Wood's application, it's clear homeless doesn't even appear as one of the factors in who this is designed to assist. So to make it consistent, I would just make the motion that the committee amend lines 37 and 38 to read, to provide vulnerable and at-risk students with assistance.
Assistance guidance. So you want to strike including students experiencing homelessness.
I think that would be redundant. I think they would be vulnerable and at risk.
And you want to add vulnerable and at risk where homeless used to be.
Yes.
Okay.
that was again on line 30.
37 and 3. So the motion on the floor,
Sorry, it's,
30, yeah,
it's actually
30.
38 and 39.
Oh, my papers say
Yeah, our
37 and
papers.
38.
Draft online.
Oh, well, I printed mine out early, so maybe it was,
So the motion, let me put the motion out there, then we'll speak to it. The motion before the committee is that after provide, the words, what is it, at risk? vulnerable and at-risk
Students,
students, and then we strike including students experiencing homelessness.
correct. And the rest would stay the same.
And let's talk, there's discussion to this motion.
Well, I am confused by this in alluding to my past motion, because mine was trying to say we're not differentiating whether that we want them to, that we are here to serve students experiencing homelessness and our vulnerable populations. So I was not in any way trying to take out this experiencing homelessness. I think that's the critical portion of the legislation where the funding is coming from. So if my motion did something to
Well,
to cause a lack of that, then I
think
would
to remember-
reconsider.
Tara-
But second question here is, as we were talking about this, addressing student first without giving them a label, I think we label them when we have replaced this vulnerable and at-risk student. We're putting the label before the student, and I'm concerned with that. And so.
Okay. Maybe I'm confused. I think to remember Carrie's point, all of homelessness has been crossed out, except for in the one area. And then on yours, on the amendment we just passed, it says to serve vulnerable and at-risk students. And we don't have a problem with it on line 11, but we
did if
do
I
have a
did if
problem
we-
with it on line, or a concern. That's, I'm just trying to
Okay.
understand here.
Yeah, I missed that one there because I was focused on the homelessness. So,
Member Hart?
I just have an overall kind of concern. And it's just in general, and forgive me, not a lot of sleep. This is in response to a movement, including legislation and an interest in communities on helping students who are vulnerable, experiencing homelessness. I understand why we would want to cross it off, but I also understand that, we talk about not going too far away from legislation. We talk about not inserting our own goals over top of legislation. Sarah, could you speak to maybe a little bit of that background? Because I feel like if we eliminate those, then it almost changes the direction that we're going in, or the fact that we're responding to a specific legislative concern, community concern. And I don't ever want to jeopardize the goodwill or intentions of donors, or, if this is to meet a specific need, I'm really concerned about eliminating references to that need. I'm not articulating it well, but can you?
Chair, if I may.
Please.
So maybe it would be helpful, I'm going to read to you from the COBE. So the title of the appropriation is Teen Centers for Students Experiencing Homelessness.
Okay.
That is the title of this funding. In
Okay.
addition to that, it reads, appropriate funds to create a grant that will support and expand teen centers and services in Utah schools, primarily for vulnerable and at-risk students. The grant will provide up to $250,000 to schools. USBE will determine the policies, rules, and handle the distribution of the grant. That is the language that we use to draft this particular
So-
rule for consideration.
Committee, I just want to be really mindful that we are honoring that and keeping that in mind as we make changes to the rule. I just think it's important to what we're tasked to do. That's just something thank you for reading that.
And thank you, Member Hart.
So
Sir,
I'd
could
like
you
to
s-
speak to my motion if possible.
Yeah, please.
So it doesn't make any sense to strike homeless. Even in the title, we've renamed it from Homeless Teen Center Grant Program. The proposal is, well, let's just call it the Teen Center Grant Program. Homeless has a specific definition. And if that definition no longer matters, why what I perceive as the pretense, if we're going to strike it in every other aspect of this rule, why that one area? And I agree with Vice Chair Moss, or Board Member, not Moss, sorry,
It's okay.
Board Member Hart, in that I think it is imperative that we follow the intent, and it appears that the intent is, it's almost like we keep that one word homeless in, so we fall within the parameters of the private funding and the grants we're receiving. And I think the fear is if we remove that one reference to it, that maybe those donors say, wait, this no longer applies to the homeless. Well, it's clear that that's not the primary target group. There's no checking to see if there's homeless. There's no priority over homeless versus non-homeless. So if that's not what we're doing with this rule, why the pretense? If we're going to strike homeless in every other area of the rule, let's be consistent. And if we're saying that it's not homelessness which drives whether or not you have access to this facility, it's being vulnerable or at risk, let's be clear about that. Let's open it up to more individuals, because it appears that's the legislative intent as far as I can discern it, and that's why I make the motion.
Any response, Chief of Staff Young?
I don't know, can I make?
Member Lear.
I don't know which direction to go, and I hear Member Carey, and I usually am a great fan of greater clarity, but I don't want to lose this money. So, I guess I'm just saying it out loud in a public meeting. What words do we keep in there to keep this money that is really well used by these centers? So Sarah, that's where your expert opinion comes in. Is it important to keep those words in there? And then if so, I think Member Carey makes a good point. Why do we strike it in the title of the rule? And should we put it back? And should we just carry on with the use of the phrase, which I am comfortable with, because I don't think we can put students who are in this situation into a homeless by choice or homeless by for a moment or homeless by not by choice. So I'm comfortable with homeless generally, but if we need to leave it in there to keep this money, I want to do that.
So Chair.
Please.
So I appreciate the question, and I also appreciate the dilemma. As staff, when we were approaching this rule, we were trying to maintain both the students experiencing homelessness from the title of the appropriation in the overall kind of authorization of the rule in lines 11 and 12. So that was where we had the students experiencing homelessness, while also then recognizing the language in the description related to vulnerable and at-risk students. So that was our approach in trying to braid those two terms to be able to align with the legislative direction. As far as it being repeated throughout the rule, I wouldn't speak to that it may, because we framed it that way at the outset, if having it repeated throughout makes a significant difference one way or the other, because we've already included both of those terms. And so through my lens to Board Member Lear, your question, that is how we are demonstrating alignment and coherence with the legislation. in terms of our approach at this time.
So maybe I missed this. Do we need to keep the word homeless in there or not?
I wanted a yes or no,
So it's on lines 11 and 12.
It's not.
Everybody's saying that. I don't see it. Unless I have a
We're
different
on,
version.
I'm on draft 1. I don't have a draft.
It's crossed out on line 10
Draft two.
in draft 1.
Oh, we're supposed to be on,
I
we're
am on
supposed to,
draft
okay.
Draft two is the current version.
Oh,
When did draft
Okay.
2 come out?
Fell in the middle of the night last night.
There it is,
So were
okay.
we, when I did that?
No, you were on the right line. Primarily was just in a different place.
Okay.
In draft two because of Board Member Lear's request to staff.
So draft 2 does have it on line 11.
I think
I may be wrong, but on line 78, it also makes that clear. The homelessness is on line 78.
Yes, so those are new, that's the draft 2 verbiage that is not, it's light blue, yeah.
And 39.
And so it isn't there.
Okay.
When we're updated, it's in there. So we need to restart this whole agenda item. I'm just kidding, don't do that. We won't do that.
You know, I'm still going to leave the motion because homelessness typically implies that one is homeless, whether that be chronic, episodic, but it's clear that that is not required in order to gain access to these facilities. So if it's not required, why present that stigma that apparently that Superintendent Dixon is concerned about? If you don't have to be homeless, why put it in there?
So we've included it based on that is the language of the title of the appropriation.
But we took it out of our title.
So we did. So Teen Center in general, as our partners at the Policy Project who are here and are happy to come and speak to this item. But as they have been out in the communities working, one of the things that they've reflected to staff is they've recognized that this need extends beyond our students experiencing homelessness. And so the framing around the conversation with the community of teen centers felt more inclusive. And so that's what you see represented in the title. And, you know, at the chair's prerogative, if you're interested in hearing more about that, I'm sure they'd speak to it.
Thank you. As I look at Vice Chair Carey's amendment here, I see that it says including students experiencing homelessness. It's not directed towards homeless students, it's just including them, so. Yeah.
Which is my only answer.
So we have a motion on the floor. Can you hit that
You made it.
Zoom button for us? Thank you. So the motion on the floor is that the committee amend lines 38 and 39 to read, to provide vulnerable and at-risk students with assistance, guidance, and connection to necessary resources. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
opposed? No.
No.
We're waiting for one more, but it fails. We'll just wait to see. We'll put it on the record as soon as she's ready. Okay. Oh, come on now. Come on now. You gotta go there. We don't have time for this. Let's move on.
abstaining is a no.
No, that.
Yeah, it says.
an abstention is a no.
All right, I'm gonna resign my post. All right, any other, we're still on this rule. That motion fails. Any other questions regarding this rule, or do we have a motion for this rule?
I have some other questions and motions to make.
Okay.
And I have a simple motion when you get around to it.
All right, Vice Chair Carey, go ahead, and then
Or
we'll,
simple question, well, it's a motion.
we'll go down the line here. Go ahead.
Line 51, You know, and I know I spoke to the superintendent about this yesterday. You know, there were several pieces of legislation coming out of this last legislative session, in particular HB 348, HB 427, and SB 103. And all of those legislative items made clear that the legislator wanted to emphasize the importance of religious freedom in our LEAs. And with that, I would just like to know, why are we removing the ability to connect with spiritual and religious resources when it's clear that an LEA doesn't have to provide that service? The amendment in line 39 says they may include the following. And there's a long list of at least, it looks like, let's say about a dozen, maybe even 24 items that an LEA may provide. But the USBE appears to want to remove this ability to connect with spiritual and religious resources from those options. And it's my understanding that that was put in the application. But why wouldn't we just leave it where it is along with these other items?
Yes, please.
So I concur with Vice Chair Carey that staff's intent related to all of these items was to move them into the application. The purpose of making that recommendation to you as our board members was really through the lens of being able to streamline the rule. One of the pieces of feedback that we had received through our partners at the Policy Project was that in the original implementation of this rule with the legislation in previous years, that the list of items, although framed in May, felt a little overwhelming to some of our more smaller entities. And so our thought process is that by removing them from the rule, but placing them in the application, that it would help to address some of that misconception, as well as make it, more accessible to our LEAs. Again, that was just a recommendation. If these are elements that the board would like to maintain, our intent is to have them in the application either way. And so we would defer to you on preference about including them in the rule.
I would just like to make a motion that well, it seems like the only one we're taking, it seems like there's 3 that we're taking out, if I'm 4, 5. Oh, the new one? I'm sorry, I'm still on the old one. Thank you. Board Member Lear had a motion, I believe. Did you
have a comment,
Let me
or-
look this up on the new.
Let's turn time over to Member Lear then.
Yeah.
Mine was just at the very last, next to last line of the rule, it references subsection 5. And I think that the subsection that actually spells out the data that's required is subsection 6.
We can fix that without a motion.
Yeah, that's,
Good catch.
When you
Thank
do
you.
the draft on this, just fix that. We don't-
no, I just wanted to call it to your attention because I thought I did before and it's still 5, so it's tedious, sorry.
Member Carey, you ready, or can we move to Member Wood?
I'm ready on my motion.
Okay, go ahead.
That's okay. I'd just like to make a motion that line 53, that instead of striking that phrase from the rule, that it remains as it was originally stated,
Okay,
meaning the ability to connect with spiritual and religious resources.
Elise, if you just word that the committee reinstate.
Is that the simple?
yeah.
Simplest way to put that.
So the motion on the floor is that the committee reinstate line 53. Discussion of the motion?
How would that look by these centers being responsible for availability? And I don't know if the question should be for
Can we ask
Sarah
Chief of Staff Young?
or if it should be for Mr. Carey.
Maybe both, I don't know.
To me, it's optional, right? It says may. So
Right.
they don't have to do it.
But how would it look if they choose to do it? Would they have a list of pastors, rabbis, and LDS bishops? Would they ask students when they come in, would you like spiritual I mean, I'm sincerely asking, how would it look? And what kind of a burden, or none at all? That's what I'm just saying. I don't want to make these centers, they already have an immense load, so I want them to help students primarily, but I also want to be realistic. So how would that look?
I
And maybe it's,
I think it would look different for every LEA, right? I mean, it's,
can you give me an
There.
example, though, of how you think it would be implemented?
I think, you just take that LEA and what works best for them, you would do it.
So no example, I mean, just, does the worker say something? Does the volunteer say something?
Wouldn't it look just like the other services we're providing? It says here we're going, to provide community resources, and then it lists mental, dental, medical, vision, academic.
brochures.
So,
Could,
That's a thought.
But-
I think there's
Yeah, having brochures available,
Yeah.
brochures and.
Not necessarily people, but information. Is that
Yeah.
what you're thinking?
That
Like,
makes some sense.
here's
yeah.
your,
Okay, that makes
local
some sense, and that's
parishioner.
no burden at all. That's just, hey,
Yeah.
if churches or religious institutions want to donate or make services available, they can leave a flyer, they can leave their names.
but they don't have to, the resource center wouldn't have to call in a
No, or.
individual to say, hey, meet with this child.
Yeah, that-
Yeah.
and I
Sounds
fear
good.
that the availability to connect makes it seem like you're trying to align, here, I'm gonna bring in this pastor with this person. Could we put it under the collaboration with community resources and make it more of kind of a line item where it's collaboration with community resources for mental, dental, medical, vision,
Oh,
spiritual
Oh.
and religious resources, so it's a collaboration with our communities as opposed to this ability to, I don't know,
Let's,
availability to connect kind of worries me, like, what are we
no, that makes sense.
expecting?
let's check with Member Carey's motion, otherwise it'd be an amendment to the motion. Is that, so Member Carey, there's a suggestion here that we, on line 49, that we just add to that list of services, spiritual and religious.
So, mental, dental, medical, vision, and religious and spiritual?
I believe that's,
It's one of those tests, like which one of these doesn't belong in the
Member
group?
Hart's hand
It's-
is about to hit the ceiling.
Yes, it was just polite, and now it's insistent. I want to I'm not ready to make a motion. I want to offer to the conversation that what I heard was that there is a concern that districts or LEAs would look at this and be intimidated by this long list, so we crossed things off to make it more palatable. And then it would be in the application. What I'm wondering is, I'm concerned by limiting these, I wanna consider flipping it. Include all these things. These are very important things. To have FAFSA applications and to have, do you want to go to college, but you're not sure how to get the money? This is your resource, and go to room 32 and speak to Mrs. So-and-so. Put them here, and then the application be explicitly clear that these are simple options. And because taking these things out, whether it's, my point is, I'm not just concerned with line 53, I'm concerned with 54, 47, 48, 51, although I do like the way 51 was changed to 52, amended. So I just am wanting the committee to consider flipping our adjustments for the concern that it's overwhelming, and have an inclusive list and rule, and then the materials, which is quite honestly what an LEA would probably look at, the application, and make that explicitly clear that these are optional. I just don't want to limit
Right.
in rule and then come back a year from now and need to add things to the rule.
Sarah, what would this, I mean, right now it doesn't change anything because we're removing it,
Sorry.
right? What would this
No.
do to our LEAs or teen centers?
So I will personally share that I probably was working on this like directly after a conversation about reducing reporting requirements. And so I will own the fact that we thought that this would help to address that kind of lens related to advancing the board's work, and that was my recommendation. So I will own that piece. And so if the board is like, we think it sends the wrong message, it's not clear, it's certainly not anything that we feel is substantial in terms of changing the program. And I apologize for misleading our
No,
partners in
no,
terms
no,
of
no, no,
thinking
no.
that
That's-
this could maybe help in that space.
Yeah, and I realize I'm talking out both sides of my mouth with simplifying things and that kind of thing. But I think these things are valuable. And I think there's a way to address the concern. And I don't think they need to report on whether they did, yes, no, yes, no. I mean, it's a multiple choice list and they can circle and, you know,
Any of the,
Anything.
any of the below, any of the
So-
above, any of the below.
I'm just wanting to make sure that our rules are, we don't want to not offer these things.
Oh, of
So
course.
I don't want to send the message that these are not good ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I will go either way. That's why I didn't make the amendment, but I'm offering it up and then I'm also offering it as a friendly, or I will just drop it.
We're wondering if you want to work with Vice Chair Carey to amend, I don't,
I'll accept it as a friendly.
What about the line 47 that you mentioned?
I would, line 52, you mean?
so while you guys work on a motion, can we go to Member Wood?
Well, it's probably in coordination, and
Okay,
mine wasn't a
that's
motion,
what I'm wondering.
it was a,
Are we all on the same page
I
here?
think we're all on the same
Okay.
page, where to me, it's all of it is collaboration with community for any of these resources. And even if you look at
Yeah.
FAFSA, isn't there a group we work with that's outside of the board?
Higher education.
Well,
That's the student counselor.
Is that it? There's something I know where they were talking about FAFSA and getting people more engaged, but it was like a community organization, I thought.
So I know USHE sponsors counselors of recent graduates in a lot of our schools.
Come in, yeah,
to be
and
able
all of
to
them.
provide
So I think all of that is collaboration with our community for any of these things.
So Molly, does your include line 47? Adding?
Yes, what,
Committee members, can I, are you ready? Yes. Okay. Is that okay, Ben? Okay. I do what Ben says and Angie says, and Angie's not here, so.
What I was suggesting to Chair Hymas that we might do is, if you pass the rule out, we could direct staff to kind of take the feedback you've given and kind of update that language. We could run it by the committee before we take it to the full board, but instead of trying to hammer out all that specific language here, maybe we could reinstate some of those things and
I think. it's
follow the
very-
guidance that
it's
we- I
actually
think
a
they're
lot
ready,
easier
yeah.
And if you've got a motion
Yeah.
ready to go,
Let's just-
that may be.
By committee, you mean this committee that works with the teen centers, is that?
No, I'm talking about.
Oh, this,
So that we're okay with
So,
it.
Vice Chair Carey, let's hear your adjusted or motion, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so the motion would be to unstrike lines 47, line 48, line 53, line 54, line 55.
That's the motion?
Yes.
Okay. So the motion before the committee is that the committee reinstates
Ah, that's the word.
lines 47, 48, 51, 53, 54,
And
and
55.
subsequently 55.
Yeah.
So are we keeping the new language on 52?
Yes.
Yes. Discussion, sorry, go ahead.
But you can do that
Well, we
after.
can take her with that.
I would make a substitute motion that we send this to staff to collaborate, because I think collaborate with community and putting any of those under there in a very succinct way, because it's going to be a community resource that brings in the religious aspect. It's going to be a community resource that brings in the medical, dental. So that would be my substitute motion.
Okay, there is a
Because you're gonna have to vote.
very long substitute motion, or,
No, to send the role to staff to articulate better language in incorporating all of the lines from Member Carey's motion.
Sarah, please.
I'm so sorry. So can I ask a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
So with that motion, what would be the expectation related to next steps? And I ask in terms of timeline. I know that there's a conversation about potentially having a July board meeting, but we don't currently have one scheduled. So would you expect that draft to come back to committee?
I would not. I
You would
would
not,
expect it it to come to us through email that shows, here's the collaboration with community, here's all the things that Member Carey
Here's how
proposed.
we've revised
And
it.
as long as there's no.
Goes to the board.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is that the committee send, the substitute motion is that the committee send the rule to staff to articulate language that incorporates the language of Member Carey's motion.
You can fix that if you'd like.
Somebody will need to fix that. I think we understand what's happening, though.
That's,
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I,
I'm a no on that. So, that passes 4-1. Are there any other questions? I want to just throw this out there. I know what this sounds like. We are halfway through our meeting and less than a third way through our agenda.
Okay, turbo.
And we've got the worst ahead of us, too.
Well, don't say
Are we gonna,
Well, hardest.
are we gonna take an action then on the rule then?
That's what
so
we
I-
need. We need a motion for the final rule.
I move that the committee approve our 277618 draft 2 pending
As amended.
as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval as second and final reading.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. The motion, I know, we're hurrying. The motion on the floor is that the committee approve R277-618 Draft 2 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Please vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any of those opposed?
So what are we approving?
So we just approved, first off, we approved Member Wood's amendment to send it to staff, and staff will work on this and then send thoughts to committee before next board meeting.
And then that will be
then
forwarded to the board.
This says that this is being forwarded to the board while that other work is happening. So we're still forwarding this to the board while the other work is happening.
Okay, then I'm still a no on that.
Okay, so that passes 4-1.
And then Chair, I just have one more on this one. It's just a question.
Okay, we did close it, but.
Thank you.
Let's be brief.
On line 74, 75, one of these lines, it says, "The superintendent may prioritize schools that serve any grade between 9 and 12." My question is just why that prioritization? What's the data? What's the reason for that?
Please.
So that is based on the use of the terminology teen in the title for the appropriation. So we were trying to capture that, recognizing that our teens, you could extend to preteen, other things. So that was where that came from.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We voted on item 3.2. We voted on an amendment. We did not vote the rule to move forward. So we want to bring that back. If we can get that thrown up there. Thank you, Chief. Yeah.
Thanks a
Staff
lot,
Young.
Sarah. That was super helpful.
So item 3.2, Remember, we passed a motion, so we need to,
Do you want me to make the motion?
please.
I move that the committee approves R277-497 Draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approves R277-497 Draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. We're on item 3.5, L2 Trek Data Sharing Agreement Amendment. We have Katie Chalice who's going to join us. And is Fernando Rubio, is he joining us? Katie, do you know?
No.
Okay.
But Carl Bowman is online.
If we have questions, okay. So Katie, please offer an intro here.
Yeah, so Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. What's my job title? So this data request is, in my view, pretty simple. You may remember, the committee may remember that in January you saw an amendment very similar to this. So this is the second language training and education research. Oh, it's right there. Teaching and Research Center at the U of U. And what happened was we passed the last amendment. It was time to get their data collection, and they realized, oh, there were these two other elements that we had hoped to receive. We forgot to ask for those. So in the spirit of, wanting to follow policy and bring this to the board, that's what this is. It would likely be collected in the fall.
Thank you. Member Wood,
I have a motion.
please.
I move the committee approve the amendment to the data sharing agreement with L2TREC and forward to the board for approval.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve the amendments to the data sharing agreement with L2 Trek and forward to the board for approval. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Agenda item 3.6 is next, required school counseling ratio report. And we have
Michelle is online.
Michelle online. Thank you. Michelle, will you tell me how to introduce yourself so I can say your last name?
Good morning, Dr. Michelle Golightly, School Counseling and Student Service Specialist.
Thank
Just
you.
say
Will
it
you,
fast.
will you give us, thank you, Dr. Golightly. Will you give us an intro here to this agenda item?
Absolutely. So in R277462 school counseling programs, it requires that approved programs must have a school counselor to student ratio of 1 to 350 in order to retain their funding. So in your backups, you'll see the school counselor to student ratio for the approved programs for this year, as well as some documents of historical data of those ratios. There are 3 LEAs that do not meet the compliance rule, and they have all submitted ratio plans that are included in backup as well. So the request would be for the committee to approve those ratio plans and then forward them to the board for final approval.
Thank you. Any questions to this, Member Wood?
I do have one question. Like on Uintas, where it seems their plan is to wait until the kids are gone. How is that a plan? Because
great plan. I
it's
think
like,
that's
we
every LEA's
see it, we
plan,
have a
isn't it?
large cohort and we're gonna move them through and then we'll be in compliance. That doesn't seem like a plan.
All right.
But that's a question, someone to educate me.
Well, Member Hart might have an answer.
Well, what I see, or how I read it was, they could go ahead and hire, but then these students are about to graduate, and they'll have a smaller number of students coming, which then makes they have fewer resources and fewer students, so then their ratios would be, I know it sounds horrible to say, but excessively high. And in a small district, they don't have that many resources to be that flexible with. So it's kind of like a lagging indicator almost. I had to read it twice, but then I thought about it, and if you have an extra 100 students in 12th grade and the 9th graders coming in, there's only 75, then you go ahead and hire when those kids are gone. What are you putting? I mean, you're doing temporary contracts, and it's hard enough finding counselors right now. So I kind of, And of course, I'm really speaking out of turn. We can have our subject matter experts speak on
That's
it. Sorry.
No, it's a great example, and hopefully we can see where, especially this late in the year, to hire a counselor for a couple weeks, right? And then maybe lay them off if if you don't need them. But
You're
Michelle,
jerking.
any thoughts to that?
HR.
Yeah, I would just echo what we already heard about looking at student enrollment numbers, as well as your point of having a lack of qualified personnel to hire. We've noticed that across the state, as well as in these ratio plans, that some of our more rural areas are having difficulty hiring.
Thank you. Any other questions or a motion I'd entertain? Vice Chair Carey, will you hit your microphone for the public?
My motion is that the committee approve the plans for the 2022-2023 school year submitted by LEAs who are out of compliance with the 1 to 350 school counselor ratios and forward to the full board for approval.
Thank you. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve the plans for the 2022-23 school year submitted by LEAs who are out of compliance with the 1 to 350 school counselor ratios and forward to the full board for approval. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Our next agenda item is item 3.7, R277-461, Elementary School Counselor Grant Program. This is an amendment and continuation, and we'll turn the time over to Director Rasmussen. We're going to turn this over to Elise Newey.
Sorry, forgot I had to turn on a microphone. So this is a continuation of a rule that is coming up before you all, and just in collaboration with some of our experts, our content area experts, we just made some minor changes to language to make it more clear. So,
Committee will want to make sure they're working off of draft 2. We made one
Thank you.
addition there, the recommendation of Vice Chair Carey. I believe it was on line
Can-
37 and 38.
Can you speak to that recommendation, Vice Chair Carey?
I think that was yours, wasn't it? Just clarifying the statewide assessments, where.
Oh, so it
the
just says
definition.
you added as defined in,
Somebody gave us feedback that they'd like to know what statewide assessments meant. I thought I may be confusing who asked us for them.
okay.
So,
I was gonna say.
somebody asked us to clarify that, so we referred that back to the statute that lists that clarifies what statewide assessments are.
Well, committee members, do we have any questions on this? Okay. And remember, we're looking at draft 2, but I think the only change on draft 2 to 1 is that addition, is that what?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
only change.
Okay,
line 38.
you're okay. I do. Remember Wood's got a light on, maybe she.
Yeah, that the committee continue and approve R277-461, draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Member Wood. The motion before the committee is that the committee continue and approve R277-461, draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye. 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 Thank you. Passes unanimously. Agenda item 3.8, R277-496, K3 reading software licenses. And
right.
we
This
will
is
hear
mine.
from Ben. Okay.
Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. I don't think I've introduced myself yet today. So the changes to this rule are coming about as a result of SB 44, which was passed during the legislative session, which updated some of the requirements on the grant applications for the K-3 reading software grant. Staff on this is Amber Wright, who's with us here in the room. So if you have any questions, Amber, if you want to come up to the table, that would be great. We'd be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you. I'll go ahead. Oh, Member Wood, go ahead.
Oh, I just have one quick question. From what I'm reading, it appears that any of our responsibility other than the funding was just removed. Is that correct or accurate?
Amber Wright, and I am the Software Initiative Specialist in Teaching and Learning. So the way that the new legislation is written has a lot of guidelines as to what, it kind of covered a lot of what the previous rule covered, but also still has a portion of that law where we are having a third-party evaluator. And so most of our responsibility is coming in that third-party evaluator and setting up what they're evaluating.
So, on line 43 and 44, it says an LEA shall select one or more technology providers through an LEA-approved selection process. And that, I'm just wondering, like, who technology providers, this is K through 3 reading software. Maybe I'm just unfamiliar with this. But does the state offer a list of providers that they choose from?
So previously, we had cooperative contracts through an RFP process. And the way that that SB 44 is written, it's giving more kind of authority to the LEAs to determine what they want to use versus USBE doing the RFP process and selecting providers for them.
So it doesn't have to be from the USBE's list, is that
Nope.
correct? And then it says an LEA shall enter into a data sharing agreement with the provider selected. And then it says an LEA's, this is lines 63 through 69, an LEA's data sharing agreement with a software provider shall require the software provider to share information with the third-party program evaluator. And then an LEA shall provide a signed copy of the LEA's data sharing agreement to the superintendent. We've had so much discussion on data sharing, right? That's where this comes back to. And I know that the USBE and I do similar things, actions that member Hart just did. But no, I mean, that's the feeling, right? Is that we're just like, oh, here we go again. Right, and so I just want to, before it comes to the full board, if we have 5 committee members saying, no, we're actually pretty good with this, we don't need to spend 2 hours on this. I'm hoping to spend a few minutes to save a few hours. Does that make sense? So, how do we make sure, or are we making sure the LEAs have as good as data privacy that we do? How do we help them? Do we help them? Do we just say you're on your own? Can we just speak to that for a second?
Yeah, so currently what happens is in our cooperative contracts, there is a data privacy sharing portion of those cooperative contracts already. And so what I did is work with Katie Chalice to look at a data privacy sharing agreement, but then just included a portion that was already included in the cooperative contracts that talks about the information that they'll share with our third-party evaluator to make sure that we're still meeting that evaluation requirement.
Okay. All right, Dr. Thronson.
I can just add one piece. By legislative code, we're required to evaluate the program, and so in order to evaluate the program, we have to get the data, and since it's no longer coming straight to us, we have to partner with the LEAs to get the data to the evaluator. So just from a legislative code requirement, that might help give a little context as well.
Are we the third party? Sorry.
No, so
We're not, right?
The provider's the third
Right,
party.
okay.
So getting the data, sorry if I misspoke
So-
on that.
Yeah. So then, line 70, a school may not require a student to participate in the K-3 reading software. So the LEA has to have it, but the students are not required to participate. Is that right? Is there an instance where an LEA just pays for this and doesn't use it?
Not that we've seen, it's a lot of money. It's over $12 million. So most of the LEAs choose to participate,
Well,
but they don't have to. Is that what you're asking?
I thought the LEA has to participate or has to have it, but the students are not
The
required.
LEAs don't have to participate. It is an
Oh,
optional
okay.
program.
I just saw a lot of shalls in there. Maybe
Yeah,
I
so
missed
if they
something.
use it, they have to do all the shalls, but if they
Okay.
choose not to even participate, they can.
Perfect. And then the parental involvement, because again, it says you can't require a student, so it's an opt-in or an opt-out? Or is that an LEA
It's,
decision?
so where it says a student, where it doesn't require a student to participate, it's just a lot of schools are doing other intervention programs or other programs with students. And so maybe like their students that are, lower reading scores, they're doing different activities with them instead of using the reading software. So it's,
Okay.
yeah.
Member Wood?
Just a question, who benefits from this? I know it was legislatively driven, but who benefits? Because it seems like there's some of that economy of scale that we might lose because we were doing the RFP process, which means large, contracts with, where now we're taking it, we were doing the work, or you all were doing the work, and now our LEAs are going to, who benefits from this?
Please.
What a wonderful question. The benefit that I think the legislature sees is that the schools have more authority in the products they select. The state had a very specific contract that had specific expectations and a limit on how much a license could cost. And so we had I think $35 was our last contract, that if the license cost more than that, they weren't an eligible provider, because when we started looking at our costs, the average cost of some of the licenses was $119. But in the math grant that is legislated, that it is provided by STEM Action Center, they were paying $20 or less a license. And so we were like, whoa, reading is a little expensive. And so there was a benefit of a cost choice. Now we'll give enough dollars per student to each LEA, and they can choose and negotiate with the vendor based on the amount that they have available. But I think the legislature this just gives greater freedom to the LEAs to choose which product they want, rather than the state kind of controlling it we've had anywhere between 5 and 8 products over the years.
So will they be given more than the $35 per contract?
So with our current, we're going off of the October 1st, 2022 enrollment. With that enrollment data, it's about $63 per student.
Wow. Thank you.
Okay, additional questions or motions?
From an audit standpoint, I'm extremely pleased to have the specificity of the data sharing agreements. It's unfortunate that it's become a convoluted kind of process. However, this actually does work to solve another issue that we're seeing more and more, where districts don't realize they're actually entering into a contract when they're using software. And this, I think this piece will only get bigger. So while parts of it are unfortunate, other parts are absolutely necessary, and concerns will only grow as we realize the scope of the issues with third-party vendors. So, thank you.
Thank you. Member
Motion.
Wood?
I move that the committee approves R 277-496 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
No, we need to highlight the right motion. That was from the previous item.
Thank you. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-496, Draft 1, on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Passes. Thank you. Our next agenda item, 3.9, this is R277-721, the Prime Pilot Program. This is an amendment, and we'll turn time over to Director Rasmussen.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a program that the legislature reworked some of the requirements during the last session. One thing I'll note, specifically for Board Member Lear, in your comments, you felt that some of the links weren't accurate. That was because the changes only took effect yesterday, even though we had already put in the statutory references. So the link should work correctly now and should have the correct language. But the legislature did take out the pilot status of this. And so it's just the Prime program now, and so we've updated the rule to reflect those legislative changes. Christy Schreck is our staff specialist who's on Zoom and prepared to take your questions. Looks like Jonathan Fry is also available to help out. So what can we answer for the committee on this rule?
Member Lear.
I just thought that Prime, because it's an acronym for something, ought to be spelled out somewhere.
I mean, I looked in the statute. I didn't see that was spelled out in the statute. For some reason, they just call it Prime, all caps, but it's not spelled out in the statute.
But it's not an acronym. Or it's a
I'm not sure if
mystery acronym.
does it stand for anything? They're shaking their
There's
heads
another
no.
word, acronyms kind of use.
Why do we use caps then? That's, because I was, when, even reading this, I thought.
It's a good
oh,
question,
I-
but
Okay, that was, I got my big notes all over my paper say, what in the Sam Hill is this, but
that is how they use it in
Sam Hill?
statute, though.
if it's,
Sam Hill? Which
in the Sam Hill. So that's fine. If it doesn't stand for anything, then it's just like, okay,
Okay.
I'm good on that. Let's see, I think the other questions I had were about the blending of, sometimes it said plot pilot and sometimes not, but now being linked to the correct or the updated statute. I feel better about that. I thought there was one other minor thing I had on line 85, distribution and use of funds. Let me see how this. And an LA may receive up to the LA's requested amount not to exceed $1,000 annually for, annually. And then I thought there was, and not to, the requested amount, and I just thought an and might be helpful in there, and not to exceed. But I guess that makes no, never mind, no big deal.
You
Okay.
ran the chair off.
Oh,
Vice Chair Carey.
and I just kept talking, it's like if somebody's gone on my,
I'm listening.
okay. That's all right, no, I don't need a motion, I just had to air that, that grammatical question, and having done that, I'm fine. So, I had no other questions.
So is the next step, are we ready for a motion? I feel like the vice president when the president's incapacitated, right? Like I get to,
You do. That's exactly what.
so does someone have a motion?
I do. That the committee approve R277-721 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
So the motion that we're considering is that the committee approves R277-721, Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. That the next item is R277, is it 613?
Okay, so you want to, if it's all okay, Chair, if I proceed?
Please.
So R277-613 is up for its 5-year review. This is a rule that we actually seem to amend quite a bit, but we have not filed a continuation recently on it. So that brought us to review the rule. There were some changes in legislation specifically on what LEAs should do when there are threats of suicide. And so the one change that staff is recommending in this rule deals with, I'm trying to find it here, what LEAs do when there's a threat of suicide. So if you go to lines 131 on, you'll see what the requirements are there when there's a report of suicide. Amy Steele-Smith is on our Zoom call. She's the one of our prevention specialists and can help us answer your questions if you have them.
I do have a handful of questions.
Please, Board Member Wood.
You're going to be asking mine.
Well, and this is actually, one is not related to new language, but it does require the LEAs to define all the words that are already defined in this rule by statute. So why are we having them create a policy to, why would we ever want?
What lines are
differing-
you looking at?
Oh, gosh, sorry. It's the part where it talks about an LEA shall create a policy.
I probably can help with that. Usually when we have a provision like that in rule, it's because the legislature at times will tell USBE, you need to order LEAs to do this in rule. And so instead of just saying by statute, LEAs shall put this in a policy, they tell USBE, you shall require LEAs to have a policy that says this and this and this. And so we kind of have to
Yeah, so
put it
it's
in
line
rule.
68, that in an open meeting by an that they have to, well, that's one of them, provide additional standards, procedures, define bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, retaliation, abusive conduct but we already have all of those defined.
And
So,
Perhaps
would
Amy
we-
can help us with that, but usually when we have that kind of language, it's because the legislature's told us this is what you need to put in rule.
okay, seems to me we
Amy,
would
would you add
require
anything to that?
them to use the same definitions, because in our world today, definitions seem to matter. Because there's a dictionary that exists that I haven't been able to find yet. So that just concerns me that they might use, define it differently. But I'd love any input, Amy, thank you.
Right, so yes, Amy Steele Smith, State Board of Education Prevention Specialist, and Ben is correct in the statute, it asks that we ensure that those specific items are defined. There's other terms that are associated with bullying, but those are the specific terms that have been requested by statute to be defined. And those are further outlined, those definitions are further outlined and defined specifically. And what that does is that just helps LEAs ensure that they are getting those specific points when we outline that in rule, ensuring that parents have information for those specific terms when they are looking at their LEA's policies.
So speaking of this dictionary that nobody can find, about a year or two ago, I don't know when it started, we I felt like a standards and assessment committee took it on to define every word possible. This was kind of a nightmare in the fact that it was like coming back everything, right, because of this concern. And so we kind of stepped back and went to this general, look, we can't define everything for you, right?
We do have the rule.
But we do have the rule, and we do have
With all
definitions
the
that
definitions
I
in
think
that.
these are in, and that's what I'm getting to, Ben. I think these are already defined in that USBE dictionary.
Yeah, well, and that's what it incorporates. That's why the question. That was my question, is that why don't we, when we tell them to do a policy, why aren't we saying using the
Use these
definitions
definitions.
in this rule?
Well, and that's, the funny thing too, is that the legislature gives you definitions in the same statute. They're telling us to require LEAs to.
So they're doing
So
the
you'll,
same
if you
thing.
look at our definitions for those terms in this rule, it's referring people back to the legislative code.
Yeah,
It's just something that I think the legislature does sometimes.
okay. And I just
whatever
didn't know if
reason.
that would be helpful to LEAs that are, reading this rule. If you have turnover. I mean, they look at
Yeah.
our superintendents have been turning over quite frequently
Yeah.
lately. If they're coming to this rule, would it be helpful to be saying, as defined in this statute or unnecessary? I don't know. It was just a question I had.
Okay, so and I apologize, I had to step out for a minute, but I wasn't sure. Do we have, is there a motion on the floor, or are we just doing questions for now?
We're just
Okay.
initial discussion.
Member Hart, are you open for Member Lear?
Neither of us.
Oh.
I did have a few questions, very
Please,
simple ones.
yeah.
Amy, if that's okay. Two really simple ones and then one that it's more just philosophical. Online, I'm anxious to not make this I'm anxious to make it as useful for LEAs as possible and as LEA specific as they want it to be. So I was looking on line 138, which is struck, and then line 139. And I was thinking that there could be bigger LEAs, designate the school employees. It could be plural, and that might be encompassed in the singular already. Ben can say that,
Yeah,
to
that
provide
would be
parental
the reason we
notification.
didn't make that change.
And same with 141, designate the formats in which notification. So if the school want to say, we may email them, we may text them, is that all encompassed in the singular?
Yeah, that's just because the rule
Okay, so that's all possible for LEAs, and that's, if anybody asked that question, they said, well, she sent me a text and not an email, and they said a format, our answer would be, they can do it
can designate multiple.
however they want, if they tell you that they might do it in different ways. Okay, that was the easier question. And then Amy, the other question, one other harder one, or simple one. On line 161, it talks about training in 5A, but I think we mean 6A.
I thought I fixed that.
I have draft one. I'm looking at draft one. So on line 161. Oh, there's a draft two, so maybe you did.
We fixed it.
Oh, thank you. And then,
That was non-substantive. so
yeah,
that's
it
fine.
was. I just wanted to be able to refer people to the right section.
There is a draft two?
Yeah.
Draft V3, is it? I know,
Yeah,
right?
I do that too. You have to
I'm
read it
sorry
like I
for
said in the
preparing.
middle of the night, the last night.
Well,
Last,
Oh, that's one thing I should have highlighted.
last question, Amy. I don't know how this came to my attention, but it seems like there's similar training required under the new HB 428 for this kind of stuff. Am I right, or do you know anything about that?
So I believe you're referencing from last legislative session, House Bill 428.
Yes.
And that, so, yes. Representative Hollins brought forth or sponsored that legislation, but yes, that's it aligns very similarly to the training that happens here. So we looked at this rule when that legislation was passed, and it's still aligned as far as those training components go. So those did not need to be adjusted at this time.
So if someone were to ask if an LEA was doing training consistent with Representative Holland's bill, that we could say, here it is required in this rule, and if they're doing this training, that would satisfy that requirement as well. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And there's an assurance piece in Representative Holland's, in that legislation. Is there an assurance required for this?
Yes, LEAs are required to maintain records of those trainings of employees. So
Okay.
yes, there is.
Those were the only questions I had. Thank you.
Thank
If
you.
I can just highlight, Chair, I should have pointed this out when we started this. We did do a draft two. The only substantive change that I recall that we did was on line 146. Was, as I recall, based on feedback from Vice Chair Carey, just asking us to emphasize the need for the superintendent's materials on suicide prevention to include internet safety or social media information for LEAs.
Oh, so
And I
that's-
did have a question to that in terms of why in this particular section would we do that? So this is a parent whose child has threatened suicide. And it seems kind of, oh, and by the way, they should be careful on the internet. Like, it just seems kind of out of context
Yeah,
for
we're
a
gonna
parent
let
who's
Vice Chair Carey answer that.
experiencing such a difficult.
Yeah, the data seems to suggest that one of the drivers of suicide can be interaction that occurs on the internet and social media when someone is already thinking that or that has that ideation. So, but to Board Member Wood's point, as I read this, I did think, wow, I don't want generic internet and social
Yeah,
media
it's out
safety.
of context. You've got this person I mean, many of us have had to deal with certain things like this, and that is not the time for someone to tell me I should have prevented it. You know, I could have prevented it if I had given them better internet or better.
But I think that maybe we could reframe that to say including resources on,
Can I make
Please.
point something out? To your point, Member Wood, the legislature has specifically told us to include this language that the superintendent should provide suicide prevention
Yes,
materials.
that was
And so this kind of goes
HB
along.
481.
Yeah, this goes along with
But it didn't
that.
require the internet safety. It very much was specific. It was very.
I was just pointing out that
Yeah.
it is requiring us to provide
Yeah, I went and
prevention
read, after that,
information
because
at
I
the
went
time.
and read HB 481 to see if I was like, oh, maybe you just missed that when you were looking in that bill. And I'm like, okay, there's nothing about internet safety in there. I just would,
well, I disagree. I think suicide prevention materials are materials, including could be materials related to internet safety. But the way internet safety is phrased, it almost sounds generic. And I was looking for something specifically on the safe use of social media and internet when working with a student who has suicidal ideation, not a generic internet safety brochure.
Well, you could certainly, we can certainly take a motion on that. You know, we're trying to, I think staff was trying to keep this general just because I don't think the legislative, we try not to be too prescriptive in rule. And so we're trying to kind of give staff the flexibility to be able to work with LEAs on this. If you want to make it more prescriptive, we defer to, whatever the committee recommends there. We were trying to meet the guidance there, but if we weren't specific enough, we can certainly entertain.
Member Hartwell, Vice Chair Carey is thinking about that. We'll-
And I just want to contribute to the conversation while we're trying to think. I see both points. When students present with self-harm or suicide ideation, there does seem to be, again, see, this is going into personal experience, but they do seem to be isolating, and one of the things that is isolating, they're getting on that social media, and that's the way they're communicating. So resources to support them in the ways that they are open to support, which may be social media, which I think is where you're going. But the language here does sound a bit cavalier or callous or just dropped in. So I do think that it's a matter of rewording that. I don't necessarily know if it's internet safety as much as it's, and I'm,
Social media
so-
risks, is that, or, that's not the right phrase, but. is
but
that
no,
what your idea?
we do need to brainstorm it. So any idea is good right now so that we can hit on something, but,
And Board Member Hart summarized what I was trying to get at. This
Yeah.
language doesn't get us.
right, you're not gonna wanna give them, oh, here, you shouldn't be on the internet, like,
Right.
dude. But there is a, what's that?
What if you had a new C, so it's not lumped in with those other,
That could be, that could be.
another big C after line 150?
You
I-
know, that,
I do like that.
that's a great, so if we did a C that said,
With
resources
or
and
information.
supports on
have to
It's
keep
not
it
internet
general, 'cause we
safety,
can't- Well,
it's-
but we can't, if I can, we can't just simply say social media,
right, that's why
Right.
it
Which
has
They're
to be.
restraining it.
because gaming is huge problem. They don't know who they're working with, and,
That's-
you know what I mean? And so,
How about online?
How about safe
yeah.
online
Activities?
resources and
Is-
activities?
I don't know how determined the committee is to have something specific to this. I will say that our staff before the committee did send me a few of the links that she provides to LEAs as part of this. She has YouTube videos that are prepared by a professor or researcher at BYU.
Is this
that
Amy?
address
When you
social.
say
This
she,
is
then?
Kathy.
Davis.
Davis.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so she has resources from BYU that she provides LEAs that talk about social media safety. I mean, I think we could, I don't know how easy it will become to come up with the language, but I think if we went back to the original text of the rule, we have the resources, we're planning on providing them. I don't know how determined you are to call that out specifically, but if you gave that general discretion without specifying the internet safety, I think it's planned for, whether that's in the language or not.
Member Wood, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I really like, because A and B were related specifically to HB 481. I mean, we were required to provide prevention materials, we were required to
They come
limit
straight from
access
that
to the
bill.
fatal means, including firearms or medication. So I think creating a C, if we feel this is very critical to that and worded in such a way that it's resources, for online support, maybe and internet safety, so that we put that, more carrying the words of, we're trying to provide resources of support.
Online support and internet safety, are those the two phrases?
Or
something.
safe.
But
It
I-
might not be,
Practices
yeah, it might not be
regarding-
internet safety, because we may be caught that that is a kind of a buzzword. And even simply switching it to safe practices and resources available,
Or healthy?
healthy.
This is what I don't, like, the internet is good,
They're,
right? There are healthy ways to navigate the internet, and these individuals need help understanding how that is, right? And so the online is, I would dare say, every suicide ideation online is involved.
somehow.
Every one that I have experienced.
But also there is an opportunity for meeting in the middle and providing resources. It's easier for students to access supports if they're using the internet safely.
So what about like healthy online navigation or?
Yeah, I'm wondering if, I don't want to put our experts on the spot, but they are our
They
experts.
are experts.
And they read the stuff, they're constant. Is it referred in literature? I guess I'd like to
Let's
ask.
ask staff, please.
Is there I think you
Amy,
kind of
this is,
might
Amy,
get
this
where
is
we're
directed at
going.
you, by the way.
This is what?
This is directed at Amy, right?
Yes, Amy, is this referred to in literature, this idea that we're trying to get at, or are we up in the night on it?
I wouldn't say you're up in the night on it, but some terminology that's used is like social media literacy. But I would like to also, kind of go back to what Ben was saying, in that on numeral or letter A, line 146, suicide prevention materials and information. This is encompassed in what we provide in those. And all of those resources are determined or identified and built by our suicide prevention specialist in conjunction with our DHHS suicide prevention specialist as well. So this, internet, using the internet appropriate, or understanding social media literacy and using that in a healthy way are things that are covered in suicide prevention materials and information.
And thank you for that. I do understand that they are included. I just think sometimes I can't get rid of the nagging feeling that sometimes when adults are talking with children and teens, they automatically think of the modalities that they would be comfortable with. So they say, call this hotline. They say, talk to a trusted adult. And they are less likely to refer them to resources. I'm not saying I'm not saying our specialists, but when it gets down to the end of the row, sometimes it feels like there are some other innovative tools that are digitally based that meet the students where they're comfortable communicating with people. And I think that's why we were calling them out, or just wanted to make sure that they weren't overlooked, because, our students, and we know that through Safe UT, right? They're so much more able to have a conversation in text rather than pick up the phone and call a phone number. But yet, when you see suicide prevention, it's call this 1-800 number. And there's a gap there that I just don't want to miss.
If I may, especially, we have the legislation coming out regulating or seeking to regulate social media use for, 13 and under? It's clear that this is something I think that should be addressed uniquely. So I'm just going to propose a C and make it clear that it is open to better language, but at least it'll give us a starting point. So C would just be information and resources on the healthy use of social media and online.
Healthy social media practices.
social media and online practices. And again, open to amendment.
Let's get it up there and we'll make sure that the verbiage is how you want it. So Member Carey, Vice Chair Carey, that looks good to you. Let me throw the motion out there then and put it on the floor here. The motion before the committee is that the committee add, after line 150, a section C, information and resources on the healthy use of social media and online practices. So discussion to the motion.
And then we would strike that language from 146.
Correct.
Yes, and sorry, as part of the motion, strike including resources on internet safety from lines 146 and 147. So discussion to that motion.
I really appreciate that. I think it makes it better, yeah.
Thank you, Member Wood. Seeing no more discussion, I don't know if you need another second to process.
No.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes. Okay, so there is still well, we don't have a motion on the floor yet. Are there any other questions regarding this, or if somebody have a motion?
I move the committee. As amended on first reading. Thank you. And
The motion before the committee is that the committee continue and approve R277-613 Draft 2 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for continuation and approval on second and final reading. All in favor say aye. Aye. That passes unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item 3.11, R277-522 Entry Years Enhancement. This is I for Quality Teaching, Level 1 Utah Teachers. This is a repeal.
Yeah, this is an easy one. This is one that's slated by its own language to sunset on July 1st. We just need to take a repeal action to carry out the board's previous direction there.
I'll do that, Matt.
Okay.
I move that the committee repeal R277-522.
Thank you, Member Lear. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277, that the committee repeal R277-522 on first reading and recommend the board repeal the rule on second and final reading. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, all in favor, that's unanimous. That's unanimous. Okay. Next agenda item, 3.12, R277-314, provider-specific licenses. This is new. And Director Rasmussen is going to take over. I'm going to invite Malia, Dr. Height up right now. Since it's a new rule, I'm anticipating some questions.
Okay, so
Ben, please.
SB 167 requires the board to create a new license type. This is specific for online providers in the SOEP program. So this is the rule where we've attempted to carry out the legislature's wishes in this regard. Some things you might just draw your attention to is Dr. Hyde has created a comparison to show how this compares to the LEA-specific license. I think most of the provisions in this rule are created to be pretty similar to the LEA-specific license. The other thing I'll point out for you before I turn things over to Dr. Height to answer your questions is we have prepared a draft 2. We looked at some suggestions that we got from Board Member Lear, and then on specifically, what line did we add that on?
58, maybe.
Yeah, that's right. So on line 58, we just clarified that we wanted the educator ethics training that a provider-specific license holder gets. It should include the educator standards described in our educator standards rule. That was at the request of Board Member Lear. So we'd be happy to answer any questions you have on how we're trying to carry out the legislative directive here.
Dr. Height, any additional comments? I know Ben covered it well, but.
He did. I would just say that Dr. Malia Height, Executive Coordinator of Educator Licensing. I would just say that as we drafted the rule, we were very mindful of SB 167 that came out of the last legislative session that required the development of this license and ensured that, that the requirements of that code are included and met.
And HB 167, is that what you said?
Yes.
Does-
Or,
does-
sorry, yeah, SB 167.
SB 167, does it, everything that we did, it melts together well, right? We're not having this clunky licensing
Yeah,
thing?
well, yeah. Yeah, this rule, complies with all of the requirements in SB 167.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Member Wood?
Not a question, just a comment. Thank you so much for the side-by-side. I think that was the most helpful thing of all, to see how we've, because if I recall in legislation, it was very important that we weren't requiring anything of them that we didn't require. And so to see that so clearly spelled out, how we've aligned it was awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Member Lear, sorry.
Yeah, I had a lot more questions until Molly gave me the backstory on this.
I didn't give you any backstory on this.
And now I have no questions at all.
Hey, good job, Molly.
And
Well,
because it's just beautiful, and the whole idea is just tremendous, and we're so glad that it came forward to us and
we're having an opportunity to
to facilitate these unlicensed
right?
people being licensed.
buy out.
So, but I do, in all seriousness, I do have a couple of questions, though I like, and then Leanne did me the service of pointing out more language that says we can't do anything to frustrate this process. But I do have a question. It says provider-specific licenses. I'm
Can you give us a line?
in the number, on line 2, in the title of the
Right in the
rule.
beginning. There you
In the
go.
title of the rule.
It's gonna be a long day.
No. Like I said, I've been persuaded. This is not a hill to die on. Never mind. So, but I am curious, if this is a provider-specific license, how does this apply to people licensed under other online programs, like the Washington online program, or many districts now have their online? So would they be able to, would those programs, those employees be able to benefit from this as well? Or is this just only for SOEP providers?
Dr. Height, please.
Yeah, so this license is specific to authorized online course providers through the SOEP program. So we have many authorized course providers that are also LEAs. Canyons participates in SOEP, Washington Online participates, as well as many others. And so those LEAs may, because they are a provider, opt for this, but they may also, if they have somebody who maybe doesn't have quite the right endorsement, opt for an LEA-specific endorsement. And any educator who is licensed with a professional license or a associate license still is qualified to teach classes for SOEP.
So as to not mislead, should it say provider-specific licenses under statewide online education program, SOEP?
So, Chair, may I?
Please, yeah.
So the code that is now adopted into 53G or 53...
4501.
Yeah, that's the one. It specifies as part of SB 167 that it's called provider-specific license and defines it that way. But we could certainly add that.
I just think it would be less misleading if it pointed out that this was specific to SOEP. That's,
And I think did you say 53F4501?
that thought I said.
Is that the,
I thought I said 53E, 53E6, 201.
oh,
Yeah. 53E6201 is where the license is named and defined, but the language or that license name is included also in the financial code, 53F4.
So do you think that's
Chapter
necessary,
5.
or am I just?
I think that the definition of the license in,
Satisfies.
I think it satisfies.
Thank you, I won't make that a big deal. I also had another, 2 places I thought that if the, that we ought to not only reference the Utah Effective Teaching Standards, but we also ought to reference professional educator standards. And again, if you tell me this is sort of unnecessary or beyond what was intended by this legislation, then I will back down. But, so on line 61, and I'm on draft 1, and then again on line 52, it seems like it should say that.
Board Member Lear, if you look on line 58, we added that based on your comments.
Oh, and
So
I'm looking at draft 1, I'm sorry.
Draft 2 has that on line 58. We added the
Okay,
extra
sorry.
standards.
I shouldn't,
And that's where we felt it was appropriate.
I shouldn't ask you to do it and then not look at what you've done, so sorry. Thank you. Thank you, then that's great. I feel like these, at least these people, however minimal their preparation, they should be at least required to meet professional educator standards.
Member Hart?
I had a related question. The training for ethics and related trainings seem to be only in year 1 and then right before they renew. Is it not possible to have that yearly? I'm concerned. The reason for my concern is we have, when we see staff members or teacher educators in the UPAC process, we often see individuals that are not in systems that perhaps do, and I'm making some assumptions here, and I understand that, that don't have a system of yearly refresher, professional trainings, critical policies type. And it seems, although I only have rudimentary data on this, they are the more, when we see those, we have a disproportionate number of people coming to us from diffuse types of organizations, and an SOEP program, by virtue of the fact it's online, and perhaps not even in our state, where is our protection for those employees to be, those educators to be trained regularly on what's new, what's different, what's within the bounds, what's out of the bounds, because things change much more than every 3 years.
Chair, may I?
Please, Dr. Hack, or Ben, yeah.
Yeah, so that it is required that they train the educators, and that's a local policy. It's part of the local policy. It's also part of the license requirement.
Every year?
In the first year and prior to renewal. One of the things that's really specific in the code, SB 167, is that the requirements for the provider-specific license shall be no more stringent than that for the LEA-specific license. And that's in line 63 and 64 in SB 167.
I know,
We'd have to change it for all license types
Yeah.
in order to do that, or at least for LEA specific.
And if the board would like to make those changes for the LEA-specific licenses, that is.
So to clarify, even though it's best practice by most of our LEAs to do an annual training on what may have changed, or just a refresher on things like ethics, what to do about boundaries, even though that's best practice, we don't have that anywhere in code?
I actually, if you give me a second, I will look at, there's mandatory, the LEAs are required to provide that kind of a training every year to their employees as part of an employer requirement, not as part of a licensing requirement.
We do have a rule on that too.
Yeah,
though.
that's what I
Well,
was just
but
looking at.
to me, I understand that the rules cannot be more stringent for licensing, but
322, I think, requires.
I'm not convinced that we couldn't include provisions that are identical because of the spirit of the law. They are something that we would require an LEA to do,
I think it already
Board Member Hart?
yes.
So we do have R277-322, which requires every LEA to have a code of conduct for their staff to include the standards, and that they are required to train on that annually.
Is that represented in this policy?
Well, this applies to LEAs,
69.
so it would.
Okay, so on line 6, are you on the right version?
I am.
Okay, so on line 69,
They made mistakes 2 or 3 times.
is there a way to reference that
Remember,
or
Dr. Hyde,
make that
please.
explicit?
I do have an idea. If the board would like to make a similar requirement as part of an employment requirement, currently not in this exact moment, but very, very soon, in the Finance Committee, they are discussing R277726, which is the SOEP rule that governs the entire program. And that would be an appropriate place to put a requirement that if they employ educators, that they are required to provide annual code of conduct training.
So-
Are you headed to that meeting?
I am in a second if I'm out of here.
Well, but I do
I'm
wanna
in the
look
Zoom
at-
meeting.
I do want to look at line 69, because it does say comply with the provider's policy for employment and professional learning. What it doesn't say is anything specific to Utah. Please remember that an online provider does not have to be Utah. So therefore, we need to have protection for,
Their policy, though, on the language on line 58 does have to include our
that's the
educator standards.
educator standards, but that
Yeah,
isn't
not the
code of conduct.
No, it's similar.
I think 726 is the place to put it. I
Okay.
think you
Okay.
could sneak it in somehow,
No,
but
no, I just-
I would rather have it more cleanly aligned to an SOEP provider requirement rather than a licensing requirement.
That is absolutely
this-
fair, and I just want to go on record as I want to protect Utah students by making, and teachers who are serving Utah students, by making sure that we have done as much preventative work to set up a successful educational environment. This isn't to put a roadblock, it's to be preventative in appropriate learning environments for our students. Thank you.
So are we asking, are we directing staff, are we asking Dr. Height to take this to finance and get this done?
If she can, that's great. If not, I will communicate offline in expectation that that is going to go to the full board.
Okay, I would like to, not to rush anything, but kind of, I would love to get to this board bylaws. I know we have a lot of conversation
Well,
going
that's the
there.
next item.
Oh, okay, great.
We just
Yeah,
have
that's-
two more
yeah.
items.
And I just have one more comment that's similar to Member Hart's. That I don't know that we can do anything about it now, but I think it is close to unprofessional and irresponsible for the board. Looking on line 56, it says, the candidate meets, and this is draft 2, that the candidate meets the requirements in this section and within the first year of employment. So that means for 11 months, an employee would have no necessary background in classroom management instruction, basic special ed law, or Utah Effective Teaching Standards. So I would hope that maybe collectively we could look at the concerns there for especially the most vulnerable special education children.
Dr. Height, without putting too much on you, are you gathering these concerns as you?
I've talked to her already about it.
Okay, well, I know as you take into
I
your next
imagine it
meeting and,
mirrors what we require.
It does.
That
Yeah.
mirrors LEA
It does,
specific.
the LEA specific mirrors that, although there is some LEA specific language where at least that person is in an LEA, working with other teachers day to day who have had some of this training. And she could go next door and get help, a helper with special ed issue.
Right. Dr. Hyde.
We are noting all of these things. Related to the annual code of conduct training, I have here Dr. Corey Camp, who can address that issue. She's our SOEP guru. So she can answer where it's required of SOEP providers.
Okay, can we,
Yes,
brief?
so I am Corey Kant, statewide online education program, educational specialist. The MOU signed with each provider requires that they are treated as an LEA and adhere to anything, all of these requirements which are required of our LEAs.
Do we do follow-up and collect assurances on that?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Without further Member Leary,
It's
without
still,
further
it's
comment.
still true that these people are isolated and not in an LEA where they can go next door and get help with special ed.
That's true. Yeah.
And I want that just noted because I think it is like I said, I feel irresponsible as a board member that we don't require training on these very basic things in the first 6 weeks. So just saying that, go ahead.
I'd be seeking a motion at this point. And whatever that looks like, do you know what I mean? Vice Chair Carey?
Well, as long as Ben puts it up there,
I'll Okay.
make the motion.
Yeah.
Draft two.
Draft two.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that there are some concerns. Before we read this motion, is there an amendment to this motion?
We can't amend it because we've got legislation
right?
that ties our hands. I just think it's unfortunate that children are at risk because of this.
So do you want me to twist your arm, or do you want to just pretend that somebody's twisting your arm when you vote? Is that what you're
I'll
saying?
just hold my nose and vote.
Okay.
I'm just going to vote.
Okay, please, Vice Chair Carey.
Make a motion that the committee approves R277-314, Draft 2 on first reading, and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carey. The motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-314, Draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All in favor say aye.
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 No.
And that passes 4-1. Thank you. Our next agenda item is item 3.13, amendments to the bylaws. And Director Rasmussen, if you'll cue us up here.
Yeah, so staff received direction from board leadership to bring Article 5 of the bylaws forward. There's been some discussion about whether it would be appropriate to take out the language that you see on lines 9 through 11, and then lines 13 and 14 of this section. There's some confusion over when that needs to be used, I think. And so the recommended language is just to strike the language as you see in that draft of the bylaws.
Okay, any
Article 5.
discussion to this? Please, Member Wood.
I think the language when the issue is related to education in any way, which is under our purview, is very appropriate. Because our constituents are not always paying attention. You know, they read something online and it's like, oh, is that what the board did? And all of a sudden we get 7 emails that, you know, saying this, and it's like, well, we never even, I mean, I would say that 427, that there was, I don't know if you all remember, I got probably 30 emails asking us to not vote to, what's the word I'm looking for? What is it? Veto 427. And it's like, that was never even on the agenda to veto 427. So what's out there and what's actually purview of the board or official action of the board, I think it's very appropriate. And if so would, instead of striking it completely, I would say when addressing issues of education, they should provide a disclaimer.
Well, I guess
We're looking
it
at,
applies to both.
yeah, but both 9 and 12.
Both
I
strike
agree
throughs.
that it's, I mean, when you're talking about personal thing, your family, or you're posting vacation, you know, pictures, or, you know, you're posting religious things that obviously that is not a position of the board. But when dealing with specific education issues, I think it's very appropriate to say, you know what, this is my opinion, I'm serving as one member of the board, this is not an official position of USBE. But that's,
So some of the concern that was brought up in regards to this was that there's no monitoring of this, and there's no, so some do it and some don't. And then what? Right? I mean, if you, and it is true, in fact, we do have some board members putting not official board, whatever, I can't remember the exact position. And we have others who are just sharing their thoughts and don't put it on there. And it's like, well, I think sometimes it comes down to this subjective thing of, if I agree with it, it's not necessary. Or if the verbiage is said in such a way, it's not necessary. So I think that's what this debate is. There are still standards. We've talked about those, even on line 16, right? 15, 16, section C. It says the roles and expectations on communications and advocacy are described in further detail in Board Policy 2004. Like, we have those expectations. This whole conversation here is surrounding the actually putting this disclaimer on your communication. And then if we have it on there, what does that mean? What can we do? Does leadership take that on and say, okay, now we have to decide if we think it agrees with what the board is talking about, or not, right? Do we have to do it on any board posts, or do we have to do it on conversation? Member Hart?
Well, there were other lights. I'm just indicating, I don't have a thing, so.
I know, you're caught in the middle. All the lights are on, and
Right.
we can,
Yeah,
however.
can we, I think we all want to say a little piece about this and then debate it. Well, go Carol, you're next. You hit that light.
I actually think Member Carey was first.
Okay, Member Carey.
Oh, I was just going to say, just today on the way to work, two things happened. One, I got a notification on Twitter that a board member was posting about activities that happened last night. And it was on Twitter, it's not an all or done. You got to go through one screen, then another screen, and then another screen. And I think there were 5 screens, and on none of the screens did it contain this language. And it goes to what Board Member Hyma said, so what happens? Like, is it a game of gotcha, and then you didn't post this? And then the second thing that happened was, and this goes to what Board Member Wood said, I got about 4 emails saying, how dare you vote against these science standards? I'm like, we didn't even get to them. Like, they were all dismissed by motion. And I understand people don't always understand the nuance, or they don't understand, maybe they just read something from someone that they see or that they trust. But I think that in today's climate, maybe 10 years ago, a disclaimer like this would be necessary. But today, I think it's very rare for someone to see this and say, this person is speaking on behalf of the board. And then to say, like again, on Twitter, like, does that disclaimer have to be on every tweet, like that multi-part tweet? And so I just think that maybe when this rule was adopted, there was wisdom in it. I just don't see that happening now. And certainly in terms of enforcement, I just don't see it at all, even on education-related posts. And then, what is the penalty if someone doesn't do it? I mean, I just don't understand, and I do want to retain the language that says that we have an obligation to be ethical and civil in what's posted. And I know that there's other parts in our bylaws, and appropriately so, that says we can't disparage other members, we have to, address each other with respect. And I think those are appropriate. I think we keep those. But in terms of this language, again, if we keep it, we have an action item, which is, the post that came in this morning. What do we do? But it shouldn't matter. as long as someone is not out there proactively saying, I'm speaking for the board, that I would be troubled by. But if someone is just posting what they're posting, I think in today's climate, people just know that it's personal.
Where are we? Are we member Lear then,
Well,
member Hart?
no,
Or
I decided I was
do we want to just go down the road
Okay,
here?
so I personally, I'll just cut to the chase. I feel like we need to take this out. One, because we can't govern this. Two, and I think this is kind of what you're saying, we have learned in schools that the way people communicate with the general public, which generally means the internet, is not able to be subject to the same rules of etiquette or discourse or what have you. You can't make rules around that and legislate that. It's an impossible task, and we've learned that in schools. The other thing is that I think I'm to the point where I don't see too many places where this is being done in other agencies. We don't see that from our legislators. We don't see that from other elected officials. And I think it's a little, it sells our audience short that they don't already know that when somebody posts something, one, it may or may not be true, and two, there wasn't a committee that wrote that message. An individual wrote that message and put it out on Twitter or whatever. And so it is an individual message. And so I do think that fewer rules are better. And if we have a rule, then we have an obligation to uphold the rule, and that's problematic. In addition, I just don't think it's relevant as much. Now, yesterday was interesting. We heard one gentleman identify themselves and say in the comments, I work at this institution, however, my remarks are my own. And I think that that is extremely professional. But I don't think that it belongs in rule. I think that it just simply reflects on the individual that's speaking. And I think that it's also, as we've also seen, that message can be conveyed in different ways without it, is a person introducing somebody and saying something, is that qualified as a disclaimer? Or does the person have to recite a specific comment? Or it's just too, what we're trying to do, and when we put this into place, we were faced with a new situation that the board hadn't seen before, and we needed a response. I think that this provision didn't age well, and I don't think it's accomplishing what we think that it is trying to accomplish, and therefore I think it's counterproductive and actually kind of in a really twisted way harms the board's public perception rather than supports it. So will I make a disclaimer? The other thing is, I have a hard time personally knowing when to use a disclaimer and when not. When I talk about educational theory that's related to school, am I to do that? Am I to make that disclaimer because somebody might interpret that as a board position? And am I supposed to put that on the top of my quilt pictures? I mean, there's too much blending of personal, professional, and I think everybody knows that Molly Hart typed that, not all of the members of the state board.
Just for some context, before we turn some time over to Member Lear, this is about 2 years old, if I remember correctly.
It is 2 years old.
And the direction of politics has changed dramatically on the board from what I can remember, and I'd have to defer to Member Lear here on that, but we had seen, or I should say previous members of the board had seen things that had not been introduced previously. And so this was a big concern 2 years ago on how do we manage the face of the board to say, no, we as a board, when we vote in here, that's our decision. And if somebody goes out and says, I don't agree with that, that's why this disclaimer came about saying, yeah, you don't agree. As a member of the board, you do agree. As an individual, you don't. And that's, again, to people and individuals anywhere. I think, for me, a post is an invitation to research, right? And that's when, if I read a post, if I'm going to take it as it is and take it as gospel, then shame on me, right? Hopefully research is happening. I don't need a disclaimer necessarily, but I just wanted to provide some of that context. Member Lear?
I'm more conflicted about this the longer I sit here. I personally, I would vote to keep, I would vote for Leanne's amendment and vote to keep that. I am, however, persuaded by the fact that I'm not in an enforcement role right now. Molly is. And I understand those things are hard to enforce. I also feel like these policies, most of them don't have any penalties. And I think they're aspirational to some degree, and I think that can be a good thing. And I think that as board members, as public officials, we honor our positions by saying we're willing to hold ourselves to these standards, understanding that there's no internet police that really can do anything meaningful to us. I've been in that position recently. I'm unwilling to let go of it, even understanding that I'm not the most current person about Twitter. I'm not a social media user for the most part. But I do, and I receive emails all the time, whether they're setups or not, from people saying, well, I just saw that so-and-so posted this about the board. Is that her position, or is that the board's position? So I don't think there is a consistent, common understanding of when a board member is speaking and when the board's speaking. And I think we should err on the side of what I would say is a higher level of professionalism, and saying we should post a disclaimer, and I think it should be in our policies, understanding that that the board leadership have other things to do, that there is a moving trend, Matt, to your point, that people understand that a post is from an individual and not a group. I can believe that, but I also feel like I'm not there yet. I think we should still hold ourselves to a higher standard. I believe we should keep the disclaimer in place, understanding the limits we have in terms of enforcement and correction even that might take place.
So we talked about a couple different things here. We do want, from what I'm hearing from you, Member Lear, we want to keep, and it's still in here, but members who post or comment on social media do so in an ethical and civil manner.
Of course.
Of course we want that. I don't know how to police that, because what's ethical
no-
and civil to me is different.
Exactly.
Right.
And we're not expecting it's going to be policed any more than, is there a disclaimer or not? And
Right.
Is it necessary or not? Is it about education or not in the specifics? So Molly does need to post something versus it's in the general and she doesn't need to post something.
Right.
So I would still like, I did like Leanne's proposed amendment to leave in, provide a disclaimer for any post or interaction that has to do with education.
Well, let's get an official amendment on the board, can we, Ben?
Oh, I thought you did.
No, I know she talked about it, but if.
She's just spitballing.
Let's get a motion on the floor, if we've all said our comments.
I would like to, even if it's a 4-1 vote, I would like to vote for keeping that, because I think it is a professional thing to do. So I understand other people are more au courant in terms of social media than I am, or, who posts what. So the motion I would make is that we leave in on lines 10 and on, there was another line 12, I think, that said, when discussing education matters, that's a good way to say it, lead with that, provide a disclaimer that the board member speaks for the individual.
You want to keep the same language, or are you amending the language?
I don't remember what you took it away, so I don't remember what it said.
Let's do
When posting on social media, and now I can't, for any post or interaction that discusses public education or education, I would probably add to that, or I would maybe modify that to say, and I think this comes from somewhere else, about a matter that might come before the board. And I don't know if that's better language than public education, or clearer or less clear, doesn't matter.
Oh.
Discussing a matter that may come before the board for vote or discussion. Not pending, that may, it doesn't have to be pending. I think it's more, I would advocate for a stronger standard that may be before the board for discussion or vote. Yes, a matter that is or may be before the board, provide a disclaimer.
And then same language that's in.
I can't remember, yeah, a disclaimer.
It's different in the two different paragraphs.
Provide, and it should be this, I think it can be the same. Provide a disclaimer that the board member speaks for the individual, not the board.
For any post or interactions, yeah.
That
So.
would be a member, Lear Morrison. Yes, so, yes, sorry, I don't want to make,
Sorry, I don't want to give you credit.
put Leanne, I don't want to put Leanne in the middle of this when I'm the one.
I will also admit, this whole rule has had or bylaw has had a chilling effect on my communication with my constituents. And I'm gonna make a blanket statement. I generally attempt to follow rules more often than not, and I have felt hindered in the ability to communicate because it's complicated. What is my position? And then in leadership, it makes it even harder because you feel like there's an additional responsibility to be only speaking on behalf of the board. It's almost like you give up your personal voice, and which is fine. But I think it's covered under that first stem that says in an ethical manner.
Right.
That's the aspirational language. The disclaimer to me, and I can put it, there's ways to handle it. You can put it in your little bio and pin it to the top so that theoretically someone sees it. But it has had a very, I think it has just as many negative effects as it does. And I don't think it actually changes a person's opinion about what they're reading.
So can I put a motion on the floor, or are we ready
I
for?
add one more thing?
Sure.
That I think is important to say. I think right now, when we're talking about teachers and their responsibility to toe the party line and say exactly what their LEA tells them to, and make sure they're following the law, I think we are in effect holding teachers to a higher standard than we're holding ourselves. And that troubles me.
That's a good point. I keep referring back to 4C, lines 15 and 16, where we have had this discussion before. But let me just put, from what I understand, Member Hart is speaking, not against is a harsh word, but speaking to a motion that's about to be put on the committee floor. Is that accurate? So the motion before the committee is that the committee not strike the language from draft 1, but amend it to read on lines 10 and 13, when discussing a matter that is or may be before the board, provide a disclaimer, and then it goes on. So I want to speak to that motion just briefly. I don't think it's necessary. I think that we're still holding standards, whether that disclaimer is on there or not. Again, I go back to this whole discussion is some are using a disclaimer, and this is just fact. If you search social media, some are using a disclaimer, some are not, and nothing's being done either way. We're not relinquishing any civic or ethical responsibility. We're not asking board members to dip below the standards. In fact, I think that they should be held to a higher standard than our educators, right? We need to set an example here. We need to do at least as much as we're asking our educators to do. So again, I speak against this motion because talking about what's actually happening here, I don't think it's helpful. Any other discussion? Member Wood?
I will probably vote no for this, and on the one item that I don't believe any of the policy in terms of holding people accountable is being held to.
Say that again.
I don't think.
Because there's no
There's
accountability.
no accountability.
But obviously you agree that, and I think we all agree, standards still need to be met from board members.
Yes.
Right, we need
yes,
to hold
I
expectations.
think we should have a higher standard, and that's why
Right.
I don't disagree with the policy as it is in place. But after listening to all the discussion and realizing that in more ways than one, none of us are held accountable
Well,
to any of the policy in some ways.
The truth is, as well,
Yeah, the only accountability we have is a vote.
I don't know that, I mean, if we say that literally, Molly's saying that we're only held responsible or we're only held
Our
accountable to our
mechanism
constituents. But
as
I guess I have loftier view of that than I don't think that's.
well, putting that disclaimer on does not allow a board member to go off the rails, right? Again, if we're talking about,
Matt, we can have all the words in the world.
well, and that's what I'm talking about. We're talking about this right here. We're
So
talking
let's
about
just get rid of the
disclaimer
whole
here.
policy. I mean,
You just made the point.
but let's get rid of the whole, I mean,
No,
it's a matter of line drawing in an area where line drawing,
The difference is this is an actual action, whereas the other,
Right.
holding to a high ethical standard is an aspiration.
well, as is this really, because there's no checking on it.
And I'd
I
accept
don't-
an amendment to your motion here if you're wanting
there's
to strike the
no way I
bylaw.
can amend it to, we can, I mean, if I'm arguing for this, I'm not gonna argue for doing away with the policy. I just feel like we are selling ourselves short. And you can call me old-fashioned, you can tell me piling work on tell me I'm piling work on leadership, any of that, but
I'm just gonna call you Carol.
or there's that. But I also think that it's an important standard, and I don't care that legislators don't do it. In fact, if legislators don't do it, I want to do it. We've got Supreme Court justices with problems like this. So I don't
Okay.
think any of that is persuasive to me. I think it's something that someone who's given the public trust should do and hold ourselves accountable, and I don't have a problem with putting in a policy. So with that, I am fine about the motion as written, although it's not quite finished, and I think we should vote.
Okay. Your light's on.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, I just wondered, I'm not, you don't need to turn it off, I just didn't know. Okay, so the motion before the committee is that the committee not strike the language from draft one, but amend it to read on lines 10 and 13, when discussing a matter that is or may be before the board, provide a disclaimer, so on and so forth. Committee members, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No.
No.
Okay. Remember what, I don't know if I caught yours. Okay, so that fails 4-1. I know, and you,
There are real persuasive arguments on both sides.
and, yeah, Member Carey, Vice Chair Carey.
I'd just like to make a motion. And that motion would be that the committee approves Article 5, Draft 1 of the board bylaws and forwards them for approval to the board.
So the motion before the committee is that the committee approves Article 5, Draft 1 on the board bylaws and forwards them for approval to the board. Seeing no lights for discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Okay, that passes 4-1. Thank you. Okay, we have one more item that is back before us. Last month, if you'll remember, we had this as a discussion item. This is item 3.14, agenda item, Board Policy 1004, Advisory Groups. This was a discussion item, and I believe we want to have a brief discussion on this and maybe bring forth some action. So I'm actually going to turn, I don't know if I'm going to talk to Vice Chair Carey on this. He's kind of been taking lead. And so, Ben, are you okay if we?
Well, by all means.
Okay.
This came up when I received an email for a vacancy on one of the board advisory groups. And it just led me to reach out to staff and say, who is getting notice of these vacancies? And after about 4 weeks, there was really no understanding of who's getting these notifications when there's a vacancy in these advisory groups. So I actually went to the policy, and if you look at 2A1, the only requirement is that USBE advisory group vacancies will be posted on the board's website and advertised to stakeholders. So then I went back and said, how are we advertising this to stakeholders? Are we paying money? Because when I hear advertisement, I typically think it's not that. It was just, well, there's email outreach. But again, when I asked what stakeholders, there didn't seem to be a consensus on who was responsible for sending this and was there a list. And I know that we have at times, a real problem filling or difficulty filling some of these vacancies. And so I look at this as a solution. And what I would propose is that, and I like the language in the proposed motion, which is, asking staff to put a motion together, but I would like to have us work on a more formal policy where there is some type of listserv or list that anyone can subscribe to, where they would receive notifications on these vacancies. And it could just be, look, this particular group, that's who we want to get these notifications on, or it could just be a generic, anytime there's a vacancy on any of these groups. But
Can I interrupt with a question?
Yes.
And you might know, because you've had conversations, staff might know. I know we send things to LEAs constantly. Are there other groups that we have contact groups, such as you're saying? Is that, Dr. Haidt, she's shaking her head as I'm looking at Joe. I see her right over those shoulders. Yes, please.
Yeah, staff have lots of different dissemination groups where we send pertinent information. For example, I share anything related to licensing with HR directors and charter directors or business administrators. We have curriculum directors, we have special ed directors. So we have anybody who's doing a particular role in the LEAs. We have dissemination groups that way. We also have content specialist roles. So you're the LEA math content for secondary math, then we have a listserv for that.
What about outside the LEA, like the Department of Health? If there was to remember Vice Chair Carey's point here, I think in our last discussion 2 months ago, or was it last month? We missed it last month. Anyway, we were worried that there might be a favoritism happening, right? Where it's like, oh, I know this person, they'd probably do great, I'll just send it to them.
We do have groups that are outside of LEAs. For example, higher institutions of higher ed. We have we talk to the deans of education specifically. The content people have dissemination groups that way. I know that our Safe and Healthy Schools work closely with some of our Department of I don't know what it is here, DCFS. Yeah, so they do collaborate with other partners statewide.
whatever is.
What would it, I'm sorry, Member Carey.
No, no,
I know
don't.
this- What would it look like to send a blanket, just blast the state? I mean, we would be overrun with applicants, or is that not a concern?
Well, I think it might be mindful to consider there's between 30 and 40,000 state of Utah employees. And that's a lot of people. And I don't want that many
I
emails.
don't know that we could just send.
That's what, that's what I'm wondering,
Yeah.
as we're trying to find out who we send these to.
Who do you send
I
it
would like
to?
it to be more opt-in, right? So yesterday during public comment, there was an individual representing a group, I think it was a pro-life group, but, voice, thank you, wow. So, but just by way of example, like if someone like that said, you know what, I would like to be notified on a particular vacancy, why wouldn't that be an option for people to, I just think in terms of parity and equity, everyone else that's not getting the email notification has to go to the website, and they've got to know when to go to catch a vacancy. And what really prompted this was when I received the email from Kelsey saying there was a vacancy on, is it Access? I reached out to a handful of people that I knew. 3 applied, 1 actually was accepted. And I thought, wow, we're now reaching into a different community, different people, different individuals. And I think that should be something that, 1, we should want. And 2, again, it's this equity where everybody who wants to get notification can. And right now, it looks like if you belong in this column of entities or individuals, you get the notification. And if you're not on this list, you've got to check the website, you've got to follow up, you've got to find out when these vacancies. And that's where all this started from.
Yeah.
Vice Chair Carey, is there, within this policy, is there another, it sounds like you have some, you said you appreciated what is the recommended action is. It sounds clear that you'd like to direct staff to look into this matter. Is there something else on the policy that we can address here? I just,
Yeah.
we're at 12:31 and we have another meeting
sorry.
starting at 1, not to rush you, but to keep you mindful.
Yeah, so in terms of 2AI, it would just be to look into the feasibility of developing an opt-in where people could opt in, receive notifications of these vacancies. But the other one would be 2AD, which is a board member may not attend a meeting of a board advisory group unless otherwise specified by state or board policy for the advisory group. And I would just like to see that struck.
Okay. I will speak to a motion that's not on the floor yet. I don't even know if that's kosher, but,
Well, and we can't amend the policy here today, so.
Right.
The motion that would be what is the, just to direct staff to bring it
Yes.
next time. 'cause
Yeah.
This is merely a discussion item.
and that's exactly it. I'm gonna speak to that. I would, I agree that the committee should work with staff to prepare a draft to address, and some of these, maybe they don't get addressed at all, right? Or maybe they don't get changed, but they will be addressed. I think that's what I'm trying to say here. And so with those 2 items, if we could,
I had a,
keep that in mind, and
Oh.
remember that I'll get to you, but it's
Okay.
gonna be 2A, it sounds like, and
oh,
2D.
I'm sorry, I thought you were through.
And that's okay. That's why I just want to make sure that staff knows that when we talk about a draft, we want those 2 items on there specifically. Is that right, Vice Chair Carey?
I've got those.
Okay, Member Lear.
And just to, and I'm sorry to have stepped out and I've got to leave in momentarily, but I would love to speak to this because my thinking has evolved in my time on the board, even having worked for the board for almost 30 years. And I'm still sort of not 100% on one side or the other, but I do better understand now what the staff members have said, that when board members attend advisory committee meetings, there's not quite the open interaction that there is when we don't. I think there are some advantages for staff members, and I've loved when we were actually invited to the student advisory meetings, and we were able to interact and discuss with students, and that was just a delightful experience, and maybe that could happen depending on how this changes, that maybe could happen more with other advisory groups. But I have been persuaded that board members provide a different kind of, change the dynamics of a meeting. And I think there's some value in thinking about that and weighing that, even though these are, it seems a little odd because they're advisory committees to us. So I just want to put in that piece of experience, having been one of the hot and bothered types in the first 2 years I was on the board about why can't I go to this meeting? And to the other point about outreach, I think we, again, have to weigh letting the staff do their work and making best efforts and saying, we'd like you to reach farther for these reasons without necessarily mandates or any intimidation or, and I know that certainly wasn't intended by Member Carey, but any pressure, because they've already got many tasks and many hats. And I don't want to add extra to their burdens. If they do what's reasonable to reach out for vacancies, I'm a fan of that. And I'm not particularly willing to make that any more burdensome for staff. And with the message that please, think about reaching out to a variety and contacting a variety of groups that maybe haven't been involved before. Thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you, Member Laird. If a directive were to go to staff, how would that look when working with the committee? Would it simply be, here's the policy, submit any amendments, and we'll put it together and send it to the committee? Is that?
I've taken notes on your directives and I'll bring up the policy.
Would it come to a committee meeting, or would it be emailed out so that we?
No, that would be an action item.
On a
for the
committee, in a
committee
committee,
to take
okay.
action on.
Thank you.
And then once that item is on the agenda, it would be a draft one essentially. And if individual board members wanted a draft two prepared, for example, or amendments to be drafted, you could contact Ben directly, ideally before Wednesday, before the full, and he could actually do a draft two or prepare amendments that we could upload so that whatever amendments you individually wanted that he didn't capture in the first draft could be ready for Friday's meeting. So that's just an offer.
Thank you. I'd love a motion. Member Wood, do you have a comment first?
Well, I'm wondering, can I say language that's not an official motion, but could be considered in future?
Yeah,
things?
so let's get what we want to direction for staff, and then we'll make the motion to direct them to do it. How's that?
So one thing that, because I know when we did all of the interviews for the Access Committee, we were given through Kelsey, she said, oh, they would love it if you would attend some of these meetings to understand the discussion. And so I would, if before we make a motion, I'd love some feedback. I would say that a board member may attend a meeting of a board advisory group as invited or as specified by state.
And I love that idea.
So that would just be something to throw out there.
Would a committee ever feel comfortable saying, as invited, I get, but if I said, hey, I'd like to come to your committee meeting, would a committee ever be comfortable saying no? I doubt it. Okay.
And I.
Ours would. We'd kick out any board member.
Stay away from you, Pat.
Yeah, there you go.
There's some committees who would
Just
say,
kidding.
if you come, you change the discussion. Or
Yeah,
if you
they'd-
come, you change the dynamics.
Okay, but I think that's good feedback. I think we can look into that, say,
We've had board members attend UPAC on a few occasions. I don't think it changed the dynamics a lot, but I do think they wonder why they're being
If
watched.
that
Yeah, I could
becomes
see
an
that.
option, that's what I think we should attend.
But don't you also have to be concerned about number? Because you can't have
Yep, you have to have
a
a-
quorum in a
yep.
meeting. So if we saw a thing and we all went, oh, we really like this, I think there's also some just open meeting and things that you have to be considerate of.
And
Well, I wonder
in the
if-
spirit of discussion too, if we're just, I actually think if we go in this direction toward, I would be pretty uncomfortable. all or nothing thing.
Yeah.
With deference to the number. And of course.
Could you be a virtual fly on the wall? Is
Yeah,
that-
that's hard for some.
Is that something that could be considered? I don't know if they said, yeah, here's the link to today's meeting.
And, I've attended some meetings like that. Yeah, you can tell me you can't speak.
Well, some of these meetings, they don't even allow you to turn your camera or mic on. And the host can control that, right? So anyway, just something other to consider, Ben.
To that point, I mean, I serve as the liaison on the State Charter School Board, and I liaise. So I don't vote, I really don't participate, but I am there to really learn, listen. I did try to vote the very first time, and they reminded me, that's not your role. So I do appreciate, and I think there's value in that. But I also think, when we look at this and think, in my interpretation, it's been presented as a negative when a board member is present.
Sorry.
That's okay. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that there is also a lot of good that could come from that. I am
Yeah.
comfortable with limiting speaking time, involvement during those advisory meetings. I certainly don't want to suggest that the board members should be directing or dominating.
Okay.
Yes, and I am comfortable with that limitation, but I am more uncomfortable with this blanket prohibition that you
Right.
can't go, because I do think that the presence allows us to hear ideas and work with those either in a favorable way.
Okay. Member Lear, I'm going to put a motion on the floor if you have 30
Chair?
seconds.
Chair,
Yes?
sorry, this is Patty Norman. Am I okay to just jump in really fast? I know
Um,
the time's, the one,
Please, go
the
ahead.
one, well, the one thing that hadn't been addressed, and I don't know if it needs to right now, but it had been brought up even in yesterday's meeting, is what does the board do once they receive recommendations from an advisory group? Do they receive, do they do nothing? And that is every single time that I've been on this for the last 7 years, it always comes up. Do we receive? Do we do nothing? Do we accept? What does it mean if we accept? What does it mean if we receive? And on here, this really talks about the appointment of and who can and can't be in the meeting, but it doesn't do anything about the work or what happens after the work is completed. Sorry.
Thank you.
Done.
That's very helpful.
I always assumed there was another section that addressed that.
Well, I'm
It-
going to, there isn't.
That's,
Not that I know of.
that's in the individual
The
policy.
motion that I'd like to put forth is I'd like to recommend that the committee direct staff to prepare a draft based on feedback from the committee of Board Policy 100, or I guess that's in there, draft of Board Policy 1004 based on the discussion for consideration in a future meeting. Does that encompass everything? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Passes. Thank you.
Okay.
But that would include the information that Deputy Superintendent Norman just shared with us.
I think that goes to different policies. Usually, I mean, our language on bringing information from committees to the board is in the individual policies, how the board interacts with those committees. We don't have anything in this particular policy, so unless we want to expand the scope of this policy, which I guess we could too, I guess we'd probably have to look at how we want to do that.
I guess what I would say is most of those policies talk about what the advisory committee does and how they bring it to the board, but it doesn't really address how the board considers or accepts or receives. So maybe we could look at that. I think, it sounds like Patty might have some ideas on how that could be clarified too.
Well, and
Does that require a motion, or do you guys just do that?
No.
Okay.
the thing is especially like this one that came yesterday, and I brought it up here. You have, what was the Utah Education Employees, what was UAESP, sorry.
Oh, Utah Special
UC.
UC, it's Utah
USC.
Special Education
You know, so-
Policy or Advisory
So
Panel.
here's a committee that we ask people to serve on, we ask people to do things, and they come to us with information. And if we had done nothing with it, it just gets kind of sucked away in our committee unless people from, other board members who are not in this committee come and look at our materials. and I guess it would be an information, maybe that's where I missed it. We do have those information items that come to the board. That's where it would be sitting, right?
They usually come either through.
But it's never a verbal, thank you to these people, acknowledge the work that they do. And so I would love, whether it's here somewhere, and maybe it's another, I guess we have no leadership sitting here, but, but look at.
Well,
yeah,
it-
the process of it, of accepting and saying, we
This is
value your work.
Can we pause this conversation? We need to, we have staff that are coming in. I'd like to declare this meeting adjourned. Is that okay? Okay, thank you.